Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Planning Committee taking place in the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall on Wednesday, the 27th of September 2023. The time is 9:30. My name is Councillor Jane Rutter and I'm the chair of the committee. Around the table we have the elected members of the committee, and my deputy chair is Councillor Edwards to my right. We also have support from a number of officers today. Julie Pinnock, the Service Lead Built Environment. And we have Simon Avery, who's our planning team leader. We have Daniel Lucas, our legal advisor, and Matthew Watson, who is from Democratic Services and who will be taking the minutes. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on the website. Can I please remind you all to ensure your mobile phones are on silent or ideally turned off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. I'd like to direct you to the handout provided on your chairs or the information slides displayed as you walked in during the breaks for further guidance about this meeting. Finally, I'd like to welcome all the members of the public to this meeting. Those of you who have registered to speak, I will invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. And you can sit at any of these places at the front. The microphone is turned on by pressing the button on the base of the unit, and a timer will appear on the screen to remind you of how much time remains. Thank you. So now we turn to the agenda. Press the right buttons on this thing. Okay, do we have any disclosures of interest, members? Councillor Lee?
Yes, I have a personal but non-prejudicial interest in respect of item 12. Due to my role as the ward councillor, I've visited the site to reacquaint myself with the layout, but I have not entered into any detailed discussions about the application.
Thank you. I failed to ask Matthew for any apologies and deputy members. So Matthew, can we just go back and do that?
Morning, Chair. Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Cunningham this morning, who's been replaced by Councillor Bolton. Thank you, Chair.
Welcome, Councillor Bolton. I believe this is your first planning committee. So behave. Good. Thank you. Any more disclosures of interest? Councillor Ashford.
Yes, I'd like to declare a personal but not prejudicial interest on item number 10, regarding the Red House, being the ward councillor for the area. I haven't spoken to the applicant, but I do know who it is.
Councillor Small.
The same, item 10, not prejudicial.
Not discussed it. Okay. Councillor Laney.
Yeah, I'm the ward councillor for Allers Backton Badger Farm, which item 6 is part of, but I have nothing to do with this.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Chairman, I am the ward councillor in Denby, but in the past we've not had to declare unless we've had any particular.
I think we're doing this for the avoidance of any concerns.
Okay, well, I'm ward councillor.
Ward councillor, but you've had no discussions about it.
No, of course.
Okay, thank you. And I need to declare that I am the ward councillor for the second item on the agenda, and I actually know personally one of the objectors. However, I wouldn't say we're close friends. We sang in the same choir. That's all. Okay, and I have a personal but non-prejudicial interest. Okay, is that okay, Daniel? Are we all clear? Good. Let's move on to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of August, and those minutes are on your papers. Is that agreed, members? They are an accurate record, thank you. And we need to accept the update sheet as an addendum to the report. Is that agreed? Thank you. We now move to the planning applications. And the first application on our agenda is at Torf House, Shepherd's Lane, Compton, The presenting officer is, the case officer is Catherine Watson. If you'd like to give us your presentation, please, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application is for the demolition of an existing dwelling and the construction of 5 new dwellings. The site is situated between Shepherd's Lane to the south and Field Close to the north. And here we can see an aerial view, so we can just see the extent of the site, quite a large site. So here we have the proposed plan. So at the bottom here, fronting Shepherd's Lane, we've got plot 1 on the right hand side, plot 2 on the left hand side, and then plots 3 to 5 at the rear, facing adjacent to Field Close. And again, here we can see a site plan. It shows the layout of the site and part of the design of the proposed dwellings. Here we can see the grain of development for the proposals. So you can see the size of the dwellings in comparison to the neighbouring dwellings, and then the situation within the plot. So here we have plot 1 floor plans. So on the left hand side is the ground floor plan. So at the bottom, the bottom elevation, that's the front elevation, and the top elevation is the rear. Then in the middle we've got the first floor plan, and then on the right we've got the second floor plan. And here are the elevations. So on the left hand side, this is the southern elevation which faces Shepherd's Lane. Then we've got the east and west elevations, which are the side, and then the rear elevation to the right. Plot 2 floor plans, quite similar to plot 1. So we've got ground floor on the left hand side, first floor in the centre, and second floor on the right. Plot 2 elevations, again on the left hand side is the south or front elevation, east and west elevations, and then rear elevation on the right hand side. Plot 3 floor plans. So in the top left hand corner is the ground floor plan. You'll see it's got an attached garage as well. At top right is the first floor plan, and then the bottom is the second floor plan. And these are the elevations. So plot, so the left hand image is the north or front elevation. This will face onto Field Close. And then we've got the west and east elevations, and then the rear elevation on the right hand side. Plot 4, again similar in size to plots 1 and 2. And so ground floor on the left, central is the first floor, and then second floor on the right. And then the elevations, left hand elevation is the northern elevation, so again towards Field Close, and we've got west and east, and then the rear on the right hand side. And in the floor plans, same sort of layout as some of the other buildings proposed. And then the elevations, so again left hand side is the front, right hand side is the rear, and then the side elevations in the middle. Here we have an artist's impression of the street scene on Shepherd's Lane, to point out that this image is shown without the current boundary treatment, which is a very high Leylandii hedge. So this is an impression of what the site could look like with new boundary treatment. And Field Close to the rear. You'll see the three houses stretching along the road there. And then we've got some visuals, photographs. So this is the view from Shepherd's Lane. On the right of this photo is the current boundary treatment on Shepherd's Lane. And then we've got a site from within, a photo from within the site. So on the right hand side, you'll see the red arrow, and that's pointing towards the boundary on Field Close. Here we have the existing trees along the boundary with the orchard. So again, on the right hand side, you'll see an arrow pointing to those trees, again, predominantly Leylandi. And then the side of the existing house, so red arrow just points out where that is. And the rear of the existing house. And then a view from the kitchen window of the boundary treatment adjacent to the orchard. And then there's a view from Field Close looking east. So on the right hand side of this photo, that's the boundary, the rear boundary of the site. And then a view looking west. So on the photo, this sort of position beyond the fencing on the left hand side, this is where the site then begins. And we've got here an indicative landscaping plan. So you'll see that there are a number of new trees to be planted and trees to be retained along the boundaries. Here we have an image showing the proposed ecology and landscape enhancements. So the red boxes show integrated house sparrow boxes. The green boxes, integrated swift boxes. Then in the blue would be integrated bat crevice features. And then again, this just shows the retention of some shrubs and hedgerow with retention of trees and also new trees. The grey shapes along the boundary, they are hedgehog accesses between the gardens. And then bee bricks as well to be included. The trees to be planted, they should be native or orchard trees. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We now move to the public speaking. We have one objector, Mark Lee, who's registered to speak. Mark, I think you have a presentation for us as well, which will come up on the screen. You have 3 minutes, but there will be an opportunity for members to ask you questions at the end of your presentation, questions of clarification. Okay, when you're ready, your 3 minutes will start when you start speaking.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I only have 3 minutes to represent the views of over 100 residents and visitors to Compton Down who have objected to this planning application. Alfred Homes have completely ignored the development constraints detailed in our local area design statement and draft village design statement, including blatantly misrepresenting building sightlines. However, I'd like to focus your attention on highway safety, which has been a long-standing concern for residents given our narrow single-track lanes and the dangerous substandard junctions onto Osborne Road. Alfred Homes have presented a highways report which fundamentally contradicts the findings of 3 previous appeal inspectors and council highways engineers who all agreed that further incremental development within Compton Down should be refused on the grounds of highway safety and the cumulative impact on the road network. So what has changed since the appeal at the inspector's seemingly decisive and final verdict? The answer is nothing. The visibility displays at the junction with Osborne Road do not meet Hampshire Highways Design Standards TG3. Alfred Homes have incorrectly used a calculation methodology meant for road speeds below 40 miles an hour to calculate the visibility displays, even though their own measured speeds are above 40 miles an hour. On the second slide, you'll see that using the correct standard, the visibility to both the north and south of this junction is 50 metres and 65 metres respectively, approximately half the required 120 metre standard. And even applying the incorrect standard used by Alfred Holmes, the required visibility displays still cannot be achieved and are further obscured by fencing and vegetation. In addition, Alfred Holmes also used the wrong trip generation database to calculate the net impact of the development on vehicle movements, thereby underestimating the true traffic increase on the narrow lanes and Otterbourne Road junction by nearly 70%. Narrow lanes where incidentally a mother and child were sadly injured by a passing van not that long ago. The Alfred Holmes Highways report simply does not stand up to scrutiny. It's littered with errors and inconsistencies and relies on accident statistics to justify further development. As any resident will confirm, there are regular near misses and unreported accidents at this junction, and the reason there's been no serious or fatal accidents is exactly because previous appeal inspectors and your own highways engineers have understood these issues and rejected further incremental development. The National Planning Policy Framework states that development should be refused on the basis of unacceptable impact on highway safety and severe cumulative impact on the road network. Please defer this application until a definitive reassessment of the highways issues upheld by previous appeal inspectors has been completed. As residents, we cannot accept a highways policy that supports incremental development in the hope that a serious accident or, God forbid, a fatality does not occur on our lanes or junctions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, members, I'm sorry.
Okay, but there will be no more outbursts, all right? I understand that a lot of people feel very strongly about this issue, but you cannot demonstrate it by clapping. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Mark, please, no, stay where you are. Stay where you are. You're not allowed to go yet. Members, I'm sure that we have questions of clarification for Mr. Lee. Councillor Lee.
Mr. Lee, I wonder if you could unpick for me. You made a statement about that the area design statement had been ignored. Could you just expand on what is behind that statement, please?
I think you'll hear more later, but to give you an example, the building sightlines in the report that Alfred Holmes has presented completely dismisses the existing building sightlines within Compton Down. The sightlines on both Shepherd's Lane and also especially onto Field Close are nearly half the existing average sightlines in Shepherd's Lane and Field Close. They also completely ignore the houses that face those buildings. So we actually would be faced with a situation where you have buildings with a large frontage onto Field Close and Shepherd's Lane as exists, and then you will have these homes which are basically right up against the road. There is no footpath on Shepherd's Lane, and there's no footpath on the side of road where these buildings will be built on Field Close. That's just one example.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Reid?
Thank you, Chair. Could you just remind me of the classification of the two roads concerned, that is Field Close and Shepherd's Lane? Are they private or are they adopted?
Field Close is adopted. Shepherd's Lane is a private road, but in order to exit Field Close, you have to go via private lanes. So Field Way and then Shepherd's Lane are required in order to get back onto Otterbourne Road. So those are both private roads.
Any more questions, members? Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. You may now return to your seat. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We now have the Parish Council representative, Councillor Francis Strange. Oh, have we?
No, we're just ready for that, Chair.
Okay.
Slides out.
Please come forward, Councillor Strange. Thank you very much. You have 3 minutes when you start speaking. You know how to switch on the microphone, don't you? Thank you very much.
Compton and Shawford Parish Council wish to object to the proposed development on the following grounds. CP3/SPD affordable housing. There should be 30% provision where the site can accommodate 5 or more dwellings or exceeds 0.17 hectares. Both counts apply to this site in that 5 by 5 bedroom houses are proposed on a site of 0.75 hectares. DM16 and DM17, the proposed development density of 7 dwellings per hectare exceeds the overall density on Compton Down, which, together with the 3-storey height and size of the dwellings, presents an overbearing aspect. This does not follow the prevalent scale and form within the area. Also, the number of houses in closeness to each other does not follow the local aspect of large detached houses in large plots. The building line for the majority of the area is a house set well back in its plot, whereas the proposed houses are much closer to the roadway. DM15. At present, there is a green aspect to Field Close. Hedges and grass areas form the basis for the frontages, so the loss of hedges and replacement with railings and low brick walls is not in keeping. This form of closure is more in keeping with an urban development and not with a green, low development area. Biodiversity. It has been admitted that some construction activity will be necessitated within the root protection areas of the retained trees. It has been said that protection will be put in place, but there is no guarantee that the integrity of the existing trees and hedgerows will be maintained. This is especially necessary in that bats were recorded commuting through the garden and foraging along hedgerows and in open areas. It has been acknowledged that the integrity of the boundary hedgerows should be maintained and that new hedgerow planting take place between plots and elsewhere to infill gaps with native species planting. However, the disturbance and possible destruction of their habitats would mean that this vital route is broken. Several trees have already been removed ahead of the application, contrary to a landscaping plan added on the 12th of September, stating that all existing trees and plantings are to be retained within or adjacent to the site and shall be protected in accordance with BS 5837/2012. Traffic. There will be a significant increase in traffic movements along narrow single-track lanes with no street lighting, footpaths and very limited vehicle passing places. The lanes are used daily by joggers and walkers, including children, hikers, cyclists and horses. Also, what notice has been taken of the fact that 5-bedroom houses are likely to have at least 2 cars per house and add significantly to the traffic movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions or clarification for the Parish Council representative? No, I think you were very clear. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you. If you could just switch the microphone off. Lovely. We now turn to the ward councillors. We have 2 registered to speak. Councillor Warwick, you're first, if you'd like to come forward. I believe you have a presentation as well. And
yes, thank you so much, Chairman.
I do 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a presentation. I'm not who, Kat, are you controlling that? Or, yeah. So if you're just happy to let that roll as I speak, that would be perfect. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to address the committee today. And over 100 residents, as you heard from Compton Down, have raised concerns about this proposal, and I am pleased to be speaking on their behalf. The objections primarily revolve around the material and cumulative impact this development will have on the established community. We believe it contravenes several essential planning policies, including the District Local Plan Policies DM 15, 16, 17 and 18, the Compton Down Local Area Design Statement, the Compton and Shawford Village Design Statement, and these documents identify the unique character of Compton Down and aim to protect it from inappropriate development. Traffic concerns will be raised by my colleague, Councillor Brophy, but the Residents Association are very concerned that this additional development will exacerbate the issue, causing unsafe traffic escalations, and are concerned about the precedent this will set for further high-density development. There are several grounds for refusing this application, in addition to those around highways, which are fundamental to preserving the character of Compton Down. The proposed properties extend up to 50% forward of the majority existing building line of homes along Shepherd's Line. Shepherd's Lane. They also increase the density when compared to other plots. So Compton Down density is around 3.6 dwellings per hectare. This development doubles the density to 5 properties on 0.75 of a hectare. So this will create an overbearing impact on the rural street scene and invade the privacy of neighbouring properties. There are 6 existing dwellings on Shepherd's Lane and behind that on Field Close, whose privacy will be compromised by this development. Despite proposed obscure glazing and roof lights, the overbearing nature of these 5 properties being of a 3-storey construction, the number of front windows, 12 of them in the case of plot 3, the removal of existing trees and hedgerows, the unreasonably close proximity of adjoining properties, and the lack of planned privacy screening demonstrate little provision to minimise the impact on neighbouring properties. Again, the designs fail to comply with statements and policies of CP13, DM 15, 16 and 17, and would result in material harm in terms of overlooking and dominating their neighbours. It will be very, very disappointing to see the removal of trees and hedgerows approved by a planning committee, particularly where they will be replaced with low-level walls and metal railings. This will disrupt the visual amenity of the area and remove the continuity of the characteristic rural leafy frontage of Shepherd's Lane. There is a lack of smaller or social housing provision at this proposal fails to offer a mix of housing options and instead opts for 5 very large houses. This neglects the needs of a diverse community and is against our policy CP2. The 5 large properties option appears to be a choice imposed by the applicant based on economic reasoning rather than one led by discussion with the local community or the local parish council. As there are a significant number of large properties in the area already, anyone wishing to live in a 2 or 3 bedroom property should choose to live elsewhere. Conditions. Should the planning committee consider approving this application, I would kindly request the following additions are considered: that the plans are reconfigured to align with the existing building line on Shepherd's Lane, that all 3rd-storey windows are rear-facing only, protecting the privacy of his existing residents, that we require front boundaries to be screened with established hedging in harmony with the existing street scene, and we implement rigorous traffic management and promptly repair any damage to the roads and verges to an adoptable standard. Any potential owners of these properties will need to contribute to the annual charge to maintain the highways of the Residents Association. Chairman, thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warwick. Thank you for sticking within your 5 minutes. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for Councillor Warwick? Councillor Laming.
Thank you. You make quite a point of the closeness of these houses to the road and also the reduction of hedges down to a very minimal level. Is there anywhere on Compton Down which would actually look the same?
That's a good question, Councillor Laming. I don't know if you were at the site visit yesterday, but if you stand at the entrance to Shepherd's Lane, you don't see any properties as you look down it. So as far as I'm aware, there is no frontage that is not leafy, and certainly from a visibility, it would be really unusual to see brick walls and metal posts.
Thank you. I think actually there's no question of that actually happening. We have a landscape plan that doesn't include brick walls and railings, so I don't think I think that was an artistic license in the picture to show us what the houses look like, not the boundary. But we will carry on. Any more questions of clarification? Councillor Laming.
My point was that the hedges are going to be reduced to a minimal level in the front.
Yeah, well, we will talk to the developer about hedges. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Warwick. Councillor Brophy, your turn. You have up to 5 minutes. I believe you have a presentation too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd like to use my time to address residents' concerns, which Mark touched upon just now, regarding road safety and the road safety impact. Now, I think we've all seen in case of development that residents often object to infilling and development based on the perception that local infrastructure can't cope. I think what's striking in this case is there's actually objective, measured reporting that the local infrastructure can't cope from highways that's gone back for over 2 decades. In this case, housing development in Compton Down has been consistently blocked over the past 2 decades by Highway's own assessment that greater density of housing would create a road safety risk. This is due to the inadequate road infrastructure serving the areas, which Mark's pointed out displays on the Otterbourne Road and Shepherd's Lane Hurdleway junctions. Residents have expressed their concerns that the current assessment by Hampshire Highways has completely contradicted their previous assessments and measurements of the risks, and they've requested that today's decision should actually be deferred to ask that Highways relook at some of their judgments on that and provide a better explanation of what's changed in this case. The junctions that I mentioned with Shepherd's Lane and Hurdleway with the busy Otterbourne Road have been subject to highway safety concerns due to substandard design and poor visibility that deemed them unsafe per Hampshire Highways technical guidance notes. Consequently, previous applications for development in Compton Down have been rejected to prevent increases in traffic that might accentuate these accident risks at the junction. On the slide, I wanted to I think we're going to struggle to read those a bit, so bear with me. I'll flag through. I wanted to flag some key examples. So in 2003, the redevelopment of on Hurdleway was refused planning permission due to the inadequacies of the junction. The appeal inspector stated that, having examined the junction carefully, it's my opinion it's hazardous to the point where planning permission for development which materially increases traffic entering or leaving Hurdleway should be refused. Now, in 2004, a traffic survey by Hampshire County Council concluded that the 3 further housing units, just 3, causing an additional 24 traffic movements per day, would represent a material increase in traffic flows and therefore compromise highway safety at these junctions. 2005, again, reviewing a decision to refuse planning permission for 4 houses on Cliffway, it was deemed that the 4 dwellings would constitute a material increase in traffic, therefore unacceptable on the grounds of safety. So subsequent to this, Hampshire County Council did traffic surveys, finding that infill developments had, subsequent to these times, had actually deemed to have breached the material threshold in traffic flows. As a result, in 2006, Winchester City Council had placed an embargo on further infill dwelling on the grounds of highway safety, as defined by previous planning inspectorates. So again, 2006, further barriers to development on Windy Ridge on Cliffway. Highways engineer had commented that they were concerned about the cumulative effects of allowing incremental developments, and in particular, the effects that increased traffic flows will have at the Shepherd Lanes and Hurdleway junctions, both of which have substandard visibility displays. The increased traffic generated by this application is therefore likely to cause demonstrable harm to users of the highway network and should be refused. So again, 2008, further applications were rejected because of cumulative increases above and beyond 5%, which at that point were deemed material. I should reinforce the fact that nothing has changed subsequently. This goes all the way forward to 2015. Again, an appeal dismissed on the basis of a cumulative material increase to the amount of traffic over the 5% limit. And again, as of 2016, planning applications have been refused. The highway safety comments there were no physical material changes have occurred since the appeal decisions were issued. It's maintained that the increased traffic generated by this application would cause demonstrable harm to users of the highways network. What I wanted to recap on is that nothing has actually changed to either of these road networks. So we've seen the same safety problems existing. Today we've seen an accident at the Cart and Horses Junction in Kingsworthy, and we've all been aware of how increased traffic and infilling can have a profound impact on some of these dangerous junctions. So the warnings have been there, nothing has changed materially, and already the density of housing in Compton Down has exceeded the threshold previously deemed dangerous. What has changed? We'd like Highways to look at this again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Well done. Kept within your 5 minutes. Just members of the committee, do we have any questions of clarification for Councillor Brophy? No. Thank you very much, Adrian. You may return to your seat. If you could switch the mic off. Lovely. Now we turn to the supporters, Chris Rees and Nick Culhane. Are you both going to speak, or Nick, are you there to talk about Highways? Okay, and you can answer questions as well. You have 3 minutes. You know how to operate the microphone. The time starts when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The plan application before you today was born out of a pre-application inquiry that we submitted to the council, which assisted in shaping and establishing the broad principles of development on the site, including the mix of housing and the design approach. With reference to the village design statement, that characterises the area as large properties set in large plots. Page 2 of the village design statement also says change is inevitable, but it should be in line with the character of the area. So we've taken direction from your officers and the village design statement informing the application prior to submission. Compton as a village shares the same local plan policies as every town and village across the district that has a defined settlement boundary, within which it is the council's position to locate new development. As members witnessed during the site visit, Compton is typified by large detached properties set within their own grounds, which has been replicated within the plan application, drawing on the local circumstances clause within policy CP2 and the flexibility afforded by the policy to replicate the character of the area. Plan application is supported by a number of reports and studies, which document the consideration given to tree retention, new native hedgerow planting and tree planting, and ecology improvements. And when combined, these reports have not yielded a single objection from any of your statutory consultees, and as a resulted in a recommendation to approve from your officers. Chair, you mentioned landscaping. You're correct. Landscaping is to be subject to a condition apart if planning approval is granted. So we can take on board the comments that have been here today to address those points. We have no objection from the Highway Authority. Mr. Culhane can talk about that in a second. Before development would commence, we would undertake a condition survey of all of the roads in the area. And if there was any damage to those roads and verges during the construction process, we would make good on that. Thereafter, Chair, there's a construction management plan to be agreed as well. This construction management plan will define the routes and also we would use marshals in respect to deliveries and vehicle movements to ensure safety at all times. The new homes in time will form part of the community of Compton. They'll make the same financial contributions as other properties do to the private roads, and it'll be no different within the village. I'll hand over now, Chair, to Mr. Culhane.
Thank you, Chair. It's been suggested that Hampshire County Council be reconsulted on this application. Can I just say that the objectors have commissioned their own report. Highgate Transport did a report, which Hampshire County Council have reassessed, and it hasn't changed their mind. They have no objection to this application. Indeed, in the last recent years, they've permitted their own development that has resulted in 98 additional traffic movements through the Shepherds Lane Junction, which they describe as being a minor increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the traffic, I am concerned that we've turned this down a number of times, and you've been sitting, if I remember rightly, on the committee days when we've been discussing Compton Down development. There is a there has been quite an increase in traffic going to Shepherd Lane School because the numbers have increased there. But we've also seen a huge increase of traffic on the Otterbourne Road. Have you actually taken that into account? Because coming out of that junction myself on quite a few occasions, it's quite difficult, particularly the Shepherd Lane one and the secondary.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, can I just remind some members who might recall the last application that the approved here unanimously was for a dwelling at Clover Hill. And members have the benefit of having Ray Alborough from Hampshire County Council, who did quite a comprehensive presentation about the traffic implications of the Shepherds Lane junction. And he presented the last 10 years accident history. And I don't think, if I recall correctly, that there was one accident that involved visibility, not the vehicles coming out of Shepherds Lane. There's been a couple of rear end shunts, which are quite normal at any junction. So whilst we appreciate that traffic flows on Otterbourne Road may have increased, it doesn't affect the safety of the visibility coming out onto Shepherds Lane.
Councillor Lee, no comments, please, from the audience. Thank you.
Chair, I'm a bit perplexed. Perhaps I can be helped here. Councillor Brophy provided some compelling suggestions that nothing had changed and indicated that a number of hazards had been looked at and a number of applications had been refused based on the risks. And yet I'm hearing here that actually things are all okay now. So I must confess I'm a little perplexed as to what actually is the situation.
I think that's a question for the officers, Councillor Lee, if you'd hold on to that one for me. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Rees, you made a reference to the traffic construction plan. Could you tell me how this is going to work, considering you're going to be on very narrow roads, which are private? I followed a 40-tonner this morning, and he took up half of the carriageway. I am a bit concerned how you intend to develop the site in general. Would you be using both roads, Field Close and Shepherds Lane, or would you be feeding traffic purely from one area?
This site, in terms of its access, it's not unusual for a house builder. We have to accommodate with the type of vehicles that we use to bring materials and deliveries to the site. So it'll be adjusted to reflect the status of the roads. We use marshals, or we call them banksmen, on sites like this. So there'll be radio contact between two parties before a delivery is allowed to come into Shepherds Lane to make sure Shepherds Lane is clear. If there's any vehicles coming, they can be informed that there's a vehicle coming. It'll pass through in a short period of time. So there's continual contact between traffic coming in, as well as then leaving the site. The construction management plan sets all of the routes. You're right, there's two entrances here. I haven't got a definitive position whether it's only Shepherds Lane, only Field Close, or both. I can't say at this time, Councillor Reid. But that construction management plan hasn't been approved yet. It's to be approved by the council. So that will define that, as well as the routes and the safety protocol.
I hope, Chairman, you can understand why I brought this up, because this is obviously of great concern to the residents in the area.
And I think our officers are very well aware of those issues and will take that into account when approving or not the construction plan.
Could I also ask, Chair, whether the existing structures, when they're demolished, are they going to be reused on site, or will they leave the site?
From a cost perspective, it's always better to use material that's there on site already, so it can be used for infill, for ground level changes. We'll always endeavour to use existing material on site wherever possible. It's more cost effective for us from a construction point of view.
So can I ask, if it's used on site, then I presume there's going to be a cruncher around to crunch it?
If there is, Councillor Reid, it will only be done at a point in time and day that the council approve. If it's not, and if we're not allowed to use one, then it'll be moved off site. It'll be done by the construction management plan and the approval of your officers.
Any more questions of clarification? Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned that the proposed grain of development map is slightly misleading because it just shows the footprint. And what I'm concerned about is the overall sense of density of the development. And I wondered if you have any data on, square meterage, gross internal area to size of plot for individual houses versus what's being proposed here. Thank you. Thank you.
The scale and form of the housing is not very different. It varies quite a lot within Compton, hence why we've tried to produce 5 individual houses. So plot 3 is very different to plot 1. Plot 3 is different compared to 5, 4, 2, and 1. To create that character, the elevations are all very different as well. In terms of the floor areas, there's plenty of examples of 2 and 2.5 story properties, which these are 2.5 story within Compton. You can follow that urban grain along Shepherd's Lane, and you can see the footprint of the houses that front onto Shepherd's Lane, and then continue. At the moment, it stops at the orchard next door to the east. We're continuing that footprint and that grain of built form along. Similarly, with Field Close, there's a gap between the property to the east of plot 3 and then going round into number 9 Field Close. We're effectively inserting houses into a continuous ribbon development that already exists, Councillor. So we're not changing that character.
Just very briefly, so the answer is no, there is no empirical data on this. It's just a sense of your feeling about it.
It's more than a sense of feeling, Councillor. We haven't got any data. We've done the figure ground drawing, which is our analysis of the footprint and the massing of those buildings. There's no data to say next door is X square meterage compared to an acreage. We haven't done that data.
I think you can usefully ask the officer if you're not happy with that answer. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. You may return to your seats. Now, just before we go to questions to our officer, I'd just like to point out that most members of the committee went to a site visit yesterday. So we have seen the site, we've walked all around the site, we've driven up and down neighbouring roads. And I'd like to remind members that if you did ask questions at the site visit, please remember to ask them again this morning. Kat, did you want to add anything before we come to questions?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Culhane noted that the Residents Association commissioned a highways report, which we've seen on the slides this morning. I do have a copy of the email that Highways sent back, Hampshire Highways sent back in relation to that, and I'm happy to. It's just a paragraph. I'm happy to read that out if that
That would
helps.
be helpful if you could just do that now, and then that might answer some questions before they arise.
Okay, so in response to the report that has been commissioned by the residents, the Highways Authority do not believe that the traffic generated by development of this size will lead to a significant impact on the highway network. It is recognised that the junction onto Otterbourne Road does not meet the standards required for a new junction being constructed to today's standards. However, the accident record at this junction does not lead the Highways Authority to believe that the minimal increase in vehicle numbers generated by the proposed development would lead to a severe impact on highway safety or the operation of the highway network.
Thank you. Sure. Yes, Councillor Pinnock, Mrs. Pinnock.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of other points. We heard from one of the speakers about affordable housing, and I couldn't quite correlate that information, but I have looked up the NPPF because there was an amendment to the NPPF after our local plan was published, and at paragraph 65, Chair, of the National Planning Policy Framework, it says where major development proposals deal with the provision of affordable housing, and this isn't, sorry, I'm reading the wrong paragraph here, Chair, apologies. Paragraph 64, provision of affordable housing should not be brought forward for residential developments that are not major development other than in designated rural areas, and this isn't a designated rural area. There's a provision in the regulations for what is a designated area, and your officers have looked at this in quite some detail over the sort of past years on that. The other thing I thought would be helpful just to say, Chair, we heard from one of the speakers about the appeal history at this site. When Hampshire County Council granted themselves planning permission for the increase to school provision at Shepherd's School, is that the name of it? Shepherd's Down. We had a meeting with Hampshire County Council and the ward members and the Residents Association. This was 4 or 5 years ago, Chair, maybe pre-lockdown, which I was at, and we had Hampshire County Council officers at that meeting. We asked them what had changed, and we asked them to clarify their position in terms of these junctions, given that sort of impressive, if you like, history from appeal inspectors, and they were very clear even back then that there had been a material change, both in terms of their assessment when they granted permission for those increase in the school, and subsequently they referenced TG, I think it's 3, which we've referenced in our report. So in Hampshire County Council's view, Chair, there's been a material change in the policy position and the assessment, and they were clear with us as your officers that there wasn't a highway embargo anymore on the use of those junctions, and I think that's important to note, which is probably why they've come forward with no objection, Chair, to this, and won't substantiate a highway reason for refusal. And I do think that's important as a planning committee that you're aware of that background to this case. I'm just thinking there was one other point, Chair. The only other point I thought I would pick up, Chair, is the densities. This is very low at 7, I think I have 7 dwellings approximately per hectare. That's low in density terms, Chair, in terms of our local
community and how it might look. I think that this is an opportunity on the landscaping side for us to put in our own contributions and our own views. So if you would like to say what you think should happen, then I'm sure we will be able to take that into account when assessing the landscape, the final landscape plan.
I'm glad you said
I think Mrs. Pinnock could contribute here.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to be clear that matters that are technical like this, it's well established in both national legislation and in our own policy that we can condition those matters. It's very usual, Chair, for us to condition technical matters such as the final landscaping arrangements, drainage details and other things you have here, and we wouldn't expect that level of detail at this stage, nor necessarily with a government appointed appeal inspector. But as Councillor Rutter was just saying, if there are specific things that, in addition to those that your officers, and it's not just us, it would be our landscape architects and others that we would engage to support us with what would be the appropriate landscape treatment here. We can have regard to those, they can be minuted, and we can take that away with us, Chair. But it's very normal, Chair, to condition those sort of technical arrangements.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know it's now normal, it didn't used to be, but I'm glad to hear that we can contribute to that, and hopefully when it goes behind the closed doors, it's all taken into account.
And I can confirm that it will be all taken into account, Councillor Reid. Okay, so with that in mind, can you all remember what you asked on site? I had a question about the access roads and verges and the protection thereof. So can I just ask, is that going to be covered by the construction plan? And is it best to try and protect things like sensitive verges in advance, or I'm going to have to close that window, Matthew, if it's all right with you. Sorry, that's the fish and chip shop extractor fan setting off. We close that window, then we won't have the noise. Yes, if you could do that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Condition 15, as you're aware, is for a construction management plan. The majority, well, the deliveries, the parking of construction vehicles, etc., will be on site. It's a large plot, so there's no reason really for deliveries or any construction vehicles to be parked outside the site. And of course, it's a narrow road, so that wouldn't be appropriate anyway. In terms of grass verges, so they'd use the existing access on from Shepherd's Lane. As Mr. Rees said, is not confirmed yet whether or not Field Close would also be used as an access. But that sort of information can be submitted as part of the construction management plan, and we can specifically request details on if there's going to be any impact on the grass verges, etc., which I don't anticipate there will be, but I appreciate the concerns because they're an important part of the character of the area. So certainly that can be factored in to the construction management plan to ensure that those verges are protected.
Mrs. Pinnick, I think you have a
Yeah,
question.
sorry, Chairman, to be, what I just need to point out to you is that we can only control the red line site. So when we're imposing planning conditions and levels of control, we don't have powers on the highway or the private road or verges. And I do wholly understand why people get frustrated about, people, delivery vans pull up outside the grass verge, not your verge, is it? But it's outside the front of your house. And I'm sure the developer is hearing and will be, if you're minded to approve this, conversant of the character of that area. They no doubt will want to sell these houses and want that curb appeal. But I just want, I want residents to hear here today that we can't control the verges, outside of someone's site, albeit that it's in the developer's gift to maintain it. And as Kat said, we can, through the construction management plan, look at those details and the technical provision for, off-site, contractors parking on the site. It's really tricky when people don't comply. This developer, I'm sure, will be carefully monitoring that site. If you're minded to approve, he's talked about marshals, what the banksmen of the past. So, in that regard, I think you can be confident, but I can't control those things that happen off-site, Chair.
Okay, I think in the informatives as well, that there are clear guidelines by which we expect the developer to operate, and he has in fact said in public this morning that any damage will be made good. And I'm sure that we
Holding him to account.
going to hold him publicly to account on that. Okay, any more questions, please, members? Councillor Edward.
Thank you, Chair. There's been considerable discussion from various people around the room today about the boundary treatment of the houses, and I think you yourself said, Chair, that the picture showing railings and brickwork was an architectural fancy rather than a proposed plan. Nonetheless, anything, in my view, along those lines would be an intrusion of urban design into a predominantly rural area. And my question is whether it would be reasonable to make specific reference to that kind of boundary treatment in condition 6.
Thank you, Chair. The landscaping plan, so the sort of artist's impression of the front of the properties where it shows the low brick walls, they're indicative. As we learnt on the site visit yesterday, as members would have learnt, there is condition 6, which does allow for a detailed landscaping scheme, and the developer is not tied down to having the brick walls if the landscape officer thinks it's more appropriate to have a more verdant boundary treatment. Something such as sort of native hedges, which can grow quite quickly, to provide a level of screening, and also biodiversity enhancements with the native hedging. Then that's certainly something that we can consider within condition 6 when that information comes through. I think from the site visit yesterday, I think members were in agreement that along Shepherd's Lane, the typical boundary treatment is a more natural boundary treatment. So certainly that's something that would, can be looked into as perhaps being a more appropriate boundary treatment, but that would all come under condition 6, where they have to submit a detailed scheme for landscaping. So hopefully that reassures members that you know, we wouldn't have allow any inappropriate boundary treatments. Thank you.
Would it be appropriate to add something like including hedging to all boundaries or something like that to condition 6? Would that be?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether it's. I'm not sure whether it would be necessary to do that. I don't know if Mrs. Pinnock thinks that would be a reasonable thing to add.
Yeah, I think rather than doing that, what you could just say is condition 6 starts as a detailed scheme for landscaping and landscaping management, tree or shrub planting. You could add there, including the boundary treatment to the frontage.
Okay,
You know, just to be specific, and the
I think we've made it
that now,
absolutely
haven't you?
clear what we want. Agreed. Councillor Lee, did you have a contribution to this?
Yes, I just wanted to add, the question I asked on site yesterday was related to the removal of hedgerow. There seemed to be a considerable amount of hedgerow that is to be removed. I think it's been mentioned today, the visual impact alone, but the fact that, you know, the goods and services ecologically and so on from those hedgerows have been established over a number of years, whether it be air pollution close to the motorway, carbon sequestration and so on. And just to remind ourselves, we had the declaration of our nature emergency, and we had 2 resolutions that we undertook as a council to look at the impacts in our decision making. I'm sure Daniel may want to make some comment in terms of what the legal implications of that are. So my question is, can we perhaps in the condition 6 be a bit more strong in the way that we phrase the landscaping plan to retain more than I'm hearing is going to be removed, please?
Thank you, Chair. Majority of the hedging to be removed. So the boundary hedging, notwithstanding the front boundaries, but the boundary hedging with the orchard and the other properties to the west is proposed to be retained. But the hedging to be removed is largely Leylandi, although very tall and gives a lot of screening. It, ecologically speaking, it's not really very nature friendly. It's dense, difficult for birds to nest in, and so on. So there's a real opportunity, I think, as part of the landscaping to improve the boundary treatments, and also between the properties as well. So I think it's of course down to members, but I think it would be an opportunity. The loss of those existing hedges could be replaced by something that's more nature friendly.
Thank you, Kat. Councillor Lee, you want to come back on that?
If I may, there was a study by University of Southampton and Sussex, which is manifest in the benefits of Leylandi. I accept that, you know, in ecologic richness, it may not be the best, but actually the fact that it's evergreen, you know, there are wider benefits to be had, whether it be air pollution because of the foliage, design of the foliage, if I can put it that way, and the noise suppression as well. And then there's the visual aspect. You know, it's going to take some time to get the similar green effect around those properties. So I just want to emphasise that.
I think your point's been made, Councillor Lee. Thank you very much. Ms. Pinnock, did you want to contribute?
Well, all I wanted to say is, you know, I do understand about the climate declaration, about the emergency that's recently been declared, the environmental one. But as a planning committee, we are governed by national planning policy guidance and our own local plan policies, and they are the things we have to consider when we're making planning decisions here today. Now, we are obviously updating our local plan. There's a local plan review. We're sort of heading to Regulation 19, and those declarations will, of course, be factored into future policy of this council. But at the moment, we have to operate within the current realms of the current local plan, the development plan. Chair, just wanted to remind members of that fact.
Okay, thank you, but I'm sure that in discussing the appropriateness or not of various options in the landscaping plan, you're going to take account of the views of members this morning. Thank you. Right. Councillor Lee, another question?
Yes, condition 17. I'm just a little bit concerned about the statement, reason to ensure protection and long-term viability of retained trees and to minimise impact of construction activity. Can that be strengthened? Should we not be putting to avoid impact of construction activity? It seems to leave a little bit of wriggle room in my view. So I wonder whether that can be strengthened. So it's page 33, condition 17.
Thank you, Chair. So we're referring to the fencing and ground protection in relation to construction period for the trees. The tree officer, should the application be approved, will oversee all parts of the development where trees are affected. The arboricultural report that was submitted gives an appropriate level of protection in terms of the impact on the root protection area. That's not just during the construction process, that has been factored in to the actual build. So there wouldn't be any, the tree officer has reviewed this and concluded there wouldn't be harm to those trees that are being retained during construction or once the build has been completed. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure we could say it was reasonable. I think everything that can be done to protect the trees will be done, and our tree officer will go on site should we give it approval to make sure that that is the case. I think that's as much as we can ask, absolutely. Right, I need to ask about the size of dwellings. We have a very clear policy in our local plan which says that the majority of houses should, in any development, should be 2 and 3 bedrooms. This clearly isn't the case here. And in fact, what we're replacing is one larger house and effectively 2 small dwellings, because the annex was used as 2 separate, small, affordable rented dwellings with 5 mansions. So how can we possibly justify that under our local plan?
Thank you, Chair. Policy CP2, you're right, it does require 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings. However, there's a proviso to that which says unless local circumstances indicate an alternative approach should be taken. So in this instance, the local circumstances of Compton Down that dictate the size of the dwellings, majority, as members will know, a majority of dwellings in Compton Down are fairly large, within large plots. And therefore, it was assessed that on this particular site, which is a very large site, that 5 bedroom dwellings would be appropriate because of the local circumstances where the existing dwellings nearby have this sort of fairly large layout and plot. Also, if the dwellings were split into smaller 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, this could result with sort of residential paraphernalia that comes along with it, such as hedges, subdividing the plots with more fencing, sheds, parking, etc., which wouldn't be reflective of the overall character of Compton Down. So this has been assessed in line with CP2, and it's considered, because of the local circumstances, that larger sized dwellings and a large number of bedrooms would be appropriate in this specific instance. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, if we've got no more, Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you. I've gone through this quite a bit. I haven't noticed any mention of any solar panels. Have I missed that? Is there any, are you going to have those or not?
Thank you, Chair. I don't believe that there are solar panels on the roofs. I don't know what other actions will be made for sort of renewable, sustainable energy, such as air source heat pumps and so on. But from the plans, I can't see that there are any solar panels on this particular development. Thank you.
Can I just something on that point? We have got conditions requiring the development to meet the, as was the Code for Sustainable Homes requirements. So we would get more detail then, and I would imagine that we'd be looking at fabric first in terms of energy efficiency. But obviously, those conditions will allow us to control the detail.
So we can ask for solar panels
if they're needed. Yes, true.
if they're needed. Okay. They're all having EV charging points in the garages, I believe. I think that's one of the conditions, number 15. So they'll need plenty of electricity coming from somewhere. Councillor Lee?
The other question I asked yesterday was the connection to the main sewers. Can you confirm that's the case and that Southern Water have obviously done their due diligence in terms of capacity of the sewer, given all the problems that clearly manifest across Hampshire in the last couple of years? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The area is on Maine's sewer network. We do have, I think we do have a condition, a standard drainage condition that requires details of foul and surface water drainage to be submitted. Apologies, I'm just having a. It's condition 11 on page 31. Detailed proposals for disposal of foul and surface water drainage submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority before the commencement of development. So where there's a site that will connect to the mains sewer, we would just require them to submit details of how that's going to happen. In terms of Southern Water, that's outside the planning process, but they would need to apply to Southern Water. And if there are any issues that Southern Water have concerns about or raise, then that would be dealt with between the applicant and Southern Water. So as far as the drainage is concerned, then condition 11 is the standard condition, and our drainage engineer has said that that's appropriate and acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
And the mitigation for phosphates and sulfates, whatever it is, phosphates and nitrates, is covered also in the conditions. That's been taken into account as well. Councillor Lee, you have another question?
Yeah, the other question I raised on site, and I think that Bev was going to mention today, I haven't heard it, is the biodiversity net gain. Appreciate where we are statutorily speaking with respect to that. Is there a figure that we have? What is the increase, given my concerns about removal of too much of the greenery? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a specific figure on this, on the report. The ecological assessment deals with recommendations for biodiversity enhancement. Also, condition 13 on page 32 requires details, the development to be carried out in accordance with the ecology report, and that would include biodiversity improvements. As you know, well, I don't know if you know, the biodiversity net gain for major developments was supposed to come in November, and the government has now postponed that. But anyway, this is not a major site. So I think that our ecologist has reviewed that information as submitted and has deemed it to be acceptable and appropriate to the site. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, members, we will move to debate. Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. There are things about this proposal which are very good, particularly that for the first time I hear that you're going up to level 5 on sustainability. However, I am greatly concerned about the biodiversity gain on this with the removal of so many hedges and putting in so many smaller ones. I'm really worried about the impact on the local neighbourhood because this design puts houses right in front of the building line, right on the road, and has a high impact. Following our site meeting, I looked at what had happened on Crossways and South Down, and that gives you a tremendous insight into the problems that you get. I think the impact on the neighbourhood is probably unacceptable. I think that the traffic report, we've been told that we have to take into account what Hampshire said, although in my own personal view, there is so much extra traffic on Osborne Road over the last 2 or 3 years because it is a major diversion route for the M3. Makes us should be able to question that report. And if I look at the accidents that I've seen between the 2 junctions, and that includes the Shortford Junction, there are problems on that road. And we've always kept that in mind. I think that the increased number from South Downs School, sorry, not Shepherd Road, Shepherd Down School, has increased the number of traffic movements from that site. And taking all that into consideration and the impact on the neighbourhood, it changes the whole essence of Shepherd Road, and it also changes the visual amenities of the other road. So I don't see how I can support this application.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the local plan, this is a very low density area, and the proposed houses have smaller plots than some surrounding properties, but they are not the smallest that we would find in the street if built. As for the buildings themselves, well, building design is always a matter of taste, but it seems to me that they will blend in well with their neighbours in terms of appearance and size, scale. The highways questions we have looked into in some detail, but we must accept that this decision is legally with Hampshire County Council as the Highways Authority, and we've heard their advice. And we have talked about landscaping and the need to make sure that the landscaping plan recognises the rural nature of the setting. So for these and other considerations during the discussion, I shall be supporting this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. So after the site visit and reading all the material, I had 2 main concerns. One was the sheer volume of development that was going on the proposed site and the highways. And I suppose, in an attempt not to cause any trouble, I asked for your guidance in terms of how I should react to those things, because what I'm hearing is, from a highways perspective, highways are not troubled by this development, although I am slightly surprised at the paucity of a rationale behind their comments. It was really just a conclusion rather than an explanation of it. And in terms of density, it's just literally a visual and a sense of when you approach that site that there's too much volume of building to the area that presents itself. But what I'm hearing from Mrs. Pinnock is that that is within the plan, and therefore is not a cause to object to this. So my two concerns remain concerns, but it sounds like I've no grounds for objection. So guidance would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, let's just pause debate for a moment and allow our legal advisor to talk about the highways aspect particularly.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I think what we have to do is take the position of highways as a statutory consultee, first of all. So ultimately, the decision rests with you. You are the local planning authority. So albeit highways, Natural England, Belief, Flood Authority can all contribute as consultees to your assessment, the planning judgment you make. Ultimately, the decision rests with you. So when we hear, and Councillor Edwards, I think this is why it caused me to speak, when we hear that actually lawfully there is no reason on a highways grounds here, that perhaps is not the case. In law, you can, if you want to, look at your consultees, take that into the planning balance and put weight where you see fit. Now, what does that actually mean? We have to look to case law to help us out here. And I've been listening to the debate and I've pulled some quotes up, for example, from a Court of Appeal case, which concerned Fareham Borough Council. And the issue there arose in the context of nutrient neutrality. And the court was faced with, well, how much weight do we put on Natural England's advice here? And ultimately, how much does the local planning authority put on Natural England's advice here? And the lordships in the Court of Appeal here, in the context of nutrient neutrality, they say the competent authority is entitled and can be expected to give significant weight to the advice of an, quote, expert national agency with relevant expertise in the sphere of nature conservation, such as Natural England. The Court of Appeal then reels off, if you like, a chain of jurisprudence, case law, which suggests that is the ultimate principle. The authority may lawfully disagree with and depart from such advice. That's the position I've outlined to you, that you can, if you want to, depart from that advice from a statutory consultee. So I think I need to correct your approach, perhaps, in how you face highways authorities' advice here. The ultimate decision does rest with you. The Court of Appeal, however, provides caution. So they say, yes, you can depart from a statutory consultee, but the caution is you've got to provide significant weight to that national expert agency, as outlined. And it continues, the authority may lawfully disagree with and depart from such advice. Now, this is the caveat here, but if it does, it must have cogent reasons for doing so. So ultimately, if the Highways Authority here are saying, we don't see any grounds to object, the evidence as submitted by the Residents Association, the society here, has been put to the Highways Authority. The Highways Authority are the national expert agency tasked with looking at these issues. And if the Highways Authority, that is Hampshire County Council, are telling you there are still no grounds to object, then ultimately you have to come up with very, very cogent reasons to depart from that advice. That's not to say that lawfully your hands are tied. You are within that gift, given that margin of appreciation to come up with cogent reasons to do so. And it's a matter of evidence, fact, analysis and weight. But here, Hampshire are cautioning that there are no grounds or evidence in their submission to suggest that there are cogent reasons to depart. But I think it's right that I correct, if you like, your approach to this. Just because a statutory consultee is saying we do not object, that does not mean lawfully there are no grounds to refuse.
Excuse me, sorry. I think Mrs. Pinnock needs to contribute as well.
I would like to just add, Chair, but it is your officer assessment and recommendation based on all the material planning considerations. We are recommending approval to you because we do not believe as your officers we can substantiate a highway reason for refusal based on the history, the evidence, the advice from our statutory consultee, and we do not believe we could defend a reason for refusal at an appeal, Chair. And Dan's right in terms of the legal position. You're the decision makers today. But in terms of making that decision, you have to make it having regard to material planning considerations, and your officer advises that you couldn't substantiate a highway reason for refusal, Chair.
Thank you. I hope that's helped everybody make up their minds. I've got Neil, you want to have another bite of that cherry?
If Chair would permit, I just add a quick question on the response, which was, do you feel the lack of an explanation as to why they took that decision is grounds? Thank you, Chair.
I think you've been given that explanation. I think, as Pinnock's explained, obviously the situation has arguably evolved since those decisions that the planning inspector, and I think Councillor Brophy, you put up on the board, how the inspectorate addressed that context at that point in time. And I think Mrs. Pinnock has rightly outlined that the authority, Hampshire, have taken an approach now which has moved on from those planning inspectorate decisions. It's really a matter for you, but your case officer assessment is that that is significant in the planning balance, that there is a change of approach. It will be right for you to listen, to look at that change of approach and factor that, if you like, put it in your toolbox as to when you come in to make your decision. It's not something that you cannot and should not ignore. Yes, those previous decisions are useful, but you're given an explanation as to why the Hampshire Authority, Hampshire County Council, that is, has moved on from that particular approach in the past.
I believe there's been a new approach centrally from central government to roads, to local, which has informed the county council.
Your testimony on planning policy, I think now, Chair, that's rightly the purview of the planning officers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And on page 25 of your report, under the heading of sustainable transport, we set out for you that there's been the introduction for Manual for Streets and Hampshire County Council's own technical guidance, TG3, which talks about the stopping distance and visibility displays, and that was published in December 2018. And that was the tenor of the meeting that I had with the parish ward members and residents association back at that time as to what those material changes were. And we did challenge the county council quite hard, because obviously before that there'd been that history that you've heard from I think principally Councillor Brophy, but others as well, and the county council had granted permission for the extension to the school, and were satisfied, you know, and you've heard from them as a statutory consultee that they're satisfied. So, you know, there has been a material change in their view, and I think, you know, you're here today to make that final planning judgment, Chair.
Thank you, and we do have to take into account that our officer recommendation is that we should permit. That's their view in the balance. It's always a balance, these things. Okay. Who hasn't contributed to debate? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I much appreciated the visit yesterday to the site. It actually did prove very useful. The current site is a very open site from the road point of view, from the public realm. Obviously, bringing 5 properties very close to that is obviously changes the appearance of the road outlook. It's very difficult to argue the highway issues when, to all intents and purposes, and I sat on the 2004, 2006 and 2015 planning committee when these were all discussed on previous occasion, to suddenly think we've got a 180-degree turn, because that's what it appears. And I think that must be really difficult, not for us as planners, but for the members of the public who really possibly just don't understand it. The traffic construction plan is an important element on this particular site because of its location, because of the nature of the feeder roads that are going to feed that site. They are private. Consequently, it's not a planning matter, it's a civil matter. And that's something for the residents themselves to be able to sort out with the proposed developer. The one thing that has not really been mentioned, other than the building will contain, or the buildings will contain roof lights, at a quick count, there are 22. roof lights. We don't know whether they're going to be shielded because we are, if memory serves me correct, 1 kilometre. Why we use kilometres, I really haven't a clue because we don't sign anything in kilometres in the UK anymore. So that is, I believe, just over half a mile from the South Downs National Park. Maybe they use kilometres because it sounds greater distance. We don't know whether those roof lights are going to be shielded because you're going to have at least 22 beams of light, if they're not, shining up right adjacent to the national park, which to me doesn't sound very good. I'm undecided exactly what I'm going to do on this one. It is a nervous one. It is a site that can be developed, undoubtedly. If you go for smaller properties, then you have the heartache of having more accesses possibly onto the highway. Is it overdevelopment when you look at the rest of the size of residential properties? If you look to the south, the properties are very much closer together, sitting on smaller plots. This is now going across the road onto the other side. I'm just very wary as to what that will prove in the visual way. Hedges, and I believe that Councillor Lee has treated these very well, they are important. The habitat that lies in those hedges is there now. If we disturb it, then that's at our cost, undoubtedly. Chairman, as I said, I'm not terribly sure which way I'm going to vote on this one, but I'm trying to see if there's a planning reason not to go along with the officers.
Right, Councillor Lee.
I can't beat what Councillor Reid said. Effectively, he's taken most of my points and articulated them particularly well. To me, there's material cumulative impacts. I understand the officer's position. I've heard what Daniel said, you know, traffic and density. I was concerned about the word severe in the email from Hampshire County Council. You know, if it has to be severe to be a problem, but there's going to be a cumulative impact. I understand there's a threshold. There's been issues about and comments about overbearing sight lines. So again, I'm not clear in my mind yet which way I'm likely to vote. That's it, really. Thank you.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a difficult one. We've had advice from the highways that it's acceptable. Obviously, very often on this committee, we come up with these things when you have a gut reaction to the traffic, but Hampshire are the statutory authority and they do have a level of expertise which I certainly don't have. So I'm, in this case, prepared to take what they say. I think there's a question of these plot lines, and that's slightly contradictory because on most of the site you have these dense hedges, and when you walk around you're not actually particularly aware of the houses, so the sense of whether they tie into a collective plot line isn't particularly clear, and it's not the same as you get in a more dense urban environment when if something's built forward it stands out. So I'm not sure if that's a major issue. I do have a problem. We've been told that with the street scene that it doesn't actually look like that. But if you look at the proposed landscape plan, they do show very small brick piers with railings in between. And I think we need to make sure that there's really robust hedges in front rather than these railings. So it ties in when you walk around the site there, you know, it is, as Councillor Warwick said, a rural feel, quite rural, but, you know, certainly dense hedgerows surrounding the houses. I always have a bit of a problem with Cupressus leylandii. They create a very sterile environment and don't allow anything, a shrub layer underneath them. They're not very good. There's no food source for birds, etc., etc. And I would be happy to see them go, but I would say that we need to make sure that the new hedges on the landscape plan, it says instant cypress hedge. And I sort of rather wince at that idea. I'd love to see beech hedges, and you can get pretty well instant effect with big beech plants. You can also do the same with yew hedges, by very mature ones. So I would like to see that. I know that's the actual landscape detail is not for debate at the moment. But I think overall, if we can create dense hedges, I would consider this scheme is acceptable.
Thank you. More debate? Perhaps I can contribute here. It is obviously a very difficult one, and I think given the history of this area and the situation which did pertain, which was that basically there was an embargo on any more development on the Compton site. That has now changed, and we have to accept the reality of that situation, whether we like it or not. And I certainly don't like it, and I am very concerned about the impact on those very narrow local lanes, both the adopted one and the unadopted one. But these houses will contribute. They will be new members of your local community. They will pay into the residents' committee that maintains the roads. The developer has undertaken publicly to make sure that any damage is made good. And given that our advice from our officers and the advice from our statutory consultee, Hampshire Highways, is that it is acceptable, and that the level of increased traffic is going to be acceptable. I don't think we have enough in our war chest, as it were, to fight that one off. And in terms of the hedging, I think we have to ask our own ecology team when they're looking at the landscape plan, is it better to keep the existing Leylandii hedge, particularly at the front on Shepherd's Lane, which is a very effective screen, but not a very effective contribution to biodiversity, whether it's better to keep that or to replace it with native hedging, which, as Councillor Gordon-Smith has suggested, beech and other, a mixed native hedge, that would be my ideal, and they can grow much higher and make an effective screen in due course. But whether it's better to keep the existing mature hedge. And I'm happy to leave that up to our ecologists, but it is a question that they need to discuss. Inevitably, we cannot stand in the way of some development. We have to try and make sure it's the right development. I'm conflicted because this is 5 huge houses and we need lots of small houses. So it's not actually going to contribute that much to our housing needs, but in this particular area, you could have put 15, 20, 30 little houses on a plot that size. I don't think that would have gone down very well with the local community, and that certainly wouldn't have helped the local road situation. So large houses in large plots. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. I am not laughing. I am saying fine, it is on the record. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. I apologise if you feel I am mocking. I am not. I am not. I am seriously considering this application, as we are all. I'm not making.
You're giggling in our faces.
Thank you. I have apologised. This is not an easy decision, but our officers have very carefully considered it. We have had pre-application advice sought and given. We have had this application brought to our officers. It isn't an easy decision. It is a significantly important decision for the local residents, and we appreciate that. And I appreciate that. And it isn't an easy decision, but I will be supporting our officer recommendation. Members, are there any more contributions to the debate? Thank you. Thank you very much. We do understand the situation. If there's no more contribution to debate, we will make the decision. This application has been recommended for approval. Can I see those in favour of approval, please? Can I see those against? Can we take that again? Those in favour of approval? And those against? And abstentions? I will cast my casting vote the way the officers are recommending. So that application is approved. The committee will now adjourn for 15 minutes for a break. Thank you. So we could reconvene this meeting of today's planning committee. I won't go through the information again, but just to say, if you could just make sure your mobile phones are switched off or on silent. And you all know that this is being live streamed and recorded for the council's YouTube channel. We now move to our next planning agenda item, item number 7. And this is Romar Ed on Mortimer Close in Kingsworthy. Actually, it's in Hebbornworthy. Those of us who know the boundary intimately. And our presenting officer is Megan Osborne, not Catherine Watson. Take away that sign. Megan Osborne. Megan, if you're ready, if you'd like to give us your presentation, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a quick update. There was a representation received this morning objecting to the proposal. The person has already objected before, so it has been counted on my report. They have submitted some photos with that, but I explained to them that it was too late to put on the committee presentation. I've assessed those photos and my recommendation still remains the same. I'd also like to add that the update sheet, there is a change to the wording on the condition relating to the windows, and it's just omitting the words second and third floors. So it's just preventing windows to be put on the elevations. Right, the application site is located within the development boundary of Hebbornworthy. The site is located to the rear of the existing house, Romar Ed, which is located off Mortimer Close. The surrounding area is mainly detached dwellings with a few semi-detached dwellings to the rear. The proposal is for one 1.5 story dwelling to be located within the garden of Romar Ed, a detached garage, parking and a rear garden. This is showing the aerial photo of the surrounding area. An application was permitted in 2017 for these houses to the rear of Leaflands for 4 semi-detached dwellings. Another application was permitted in 2016 for the houses to the south of this site. The application proposes a rear garden to the south, retaining the existing trees along the boundary. The driveway to the dwelling is located to the north of the site, leading up to the dwelling, with parking in a proposed detached garage. There is proposed planting to the northern boundary of the site. These are showing the elevations of the proposed dwelling. And the proposed floor plans. It's proposed to be a 4-bedroom dwelling. There are 4 windows to the rear of the dwelling. 3 of them are 4 bathrooms and proposed to be obscurely glazed and conditioned as such. And the last one is for bedroom 2, which is to the rear of the property as well. This is showing sections. The top of the screen is a section between the proposed dwelling and Leaflands, which is to the north of the proposed property. And in between these 2 dwellings, there was an access road to dwellings to the rear of the site as well. And to the bottom of the screen, on the right-hand side is the proposed property, the front of the proposed property. And to the left is the existing house, Romar Ed. This is the proposed site plan with the retained trees shown on the plan. As you can see here, there's a distance of approximately 22 metres from the proposed windows at the rear of this dwelling to the windows at Russet House to the south. There are also windows in the front of the property looking north, And there's a distance of approximately 22 metres to the dwelling to the north, the nearest dwelling to the north, across the access road. Take you through some photos. This is a photo looking from the site where the proposed dwelling will be towards Russet House to the south. And this is a photo looking north towards Leaflands. This is a photo standing approximately where the driveway to the new dwelling would be, looking towards the rear of the site. And as you can see, the properties on the right-hand side of the photo, they're the new newish semi-detached dwellings at the rear of Leaflands. And this is the existing dwelling at Romar Ed. And this is standing approximately where I can't get the height, but approximately where the window would be, the bedroom window looking out towards where Russet House is. And you can see Russet House just in the corner there. And this is standing on the access road with Leaflands on my right and the access site on the left. So the proposal on the left. This application is located within a settlement boundary of Kingsworthy, where the principle of new dwelling houses is acceptable. Overall, it's considered the proposal is well designed in relation to the character of the surrounding area and would not result in any material planning harm on neighbouring amenities that would warrant the refusal of this application. Therefore, this application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now turn to public speaking. We have two objectors, Hazel Newton and Owen Newton. It's just Owen who's going to speak. Thank you. Owen, you have 3 minutes to speak. Your timer will start when you start speaking, so don't panic. Yes, please, if you could switch on the microphone. And when you're ready, don't rush.
Good morning. The report states the proposed development would not result in any material planning harm in terms of overlooking, overshadowing or overbearing on any surrounding residential amenities, and that the proposal complies with policy DM17. It is DM17 Part 7 overbearing, overlooking and overshadowing that I wish to contest specifically on behalf of Leaflands, Russet and Oaklands. Overbearing. From the proposed elevations, the building appears to be approximately 7.5 metres tall. The owner of Russet House requested the actual ridge height from the designer, and this request was dismissed. The ridge height of Russet House on the site plan on page 87 is 69 metres. A 7.5 metre house at the ground height specified would have a ridge of approximately 71 metres, a full 2 metre higher than Russet. The proposed house would dominate the houses in the surrounding area, and particularly Russet House. On page 86, you can see that all 2-storey new builds in the area have partial flat roofs to reduce their size and amenity impact, as previous developers were required to restrict the height of roof lines. This also required the developer of Russet and surrounding houses to lower the ground level by 1 metre before laying foundations. Overlooking. Kingsworthy Parish Council has also raised objections specifically on this issue, something they did not do with the previous development. The planning officer has deemed there to be no loss of amenity for both Leaflands and Russet due to the distances. However, the high quality places SPD, which DM17 points to, is clear in the case of overlooking that acceptable overlooking distance will depend on the context. So despite the developer's assertion that distances are acceptable and the planning officer's agreement, distances should be considered in the context. Under the last new build development in Mortimer Close, the developer worked with the planning officer to alleviate concerns of overlooking on neighbouring houses as detailed in the report. This was at greater distances, and significant measures were taken by the developer to reduce the overlooking impact on neighbouring properties in both design and planting. There is actually less than 20 metres from the nearest ground floor window of the proposed property to Russet's first floor, and given the height difference, they would easily be directly looked into. The page 93 picture showing the ground floor view to Leaflands does nothing to show the reality, which is that due to the house being angled towards our property, all 3 first floor bedrooms would have unimpeded views of the ground floor bedrooms, living room, patio and the entire garden, with no mitigations in place as the trees will be removed. Overshadowing. Oaklands faces east. I'm unclear how a considerable 7.5 tall metre building built at higher ground elevation at 15 metre distance could not cause overshadowing with a rising sun, and that will affect their living room. The page 94 photo is also completely inaccurate in its position. In conclusion, there have been a number of developments in Mortimer Close, but no house has ever been built directly facing others in such close proximity. Previous developments have been required to be designed in context with the surrounding houses to mitigate overlooking and overbearing elements. We urge the proposal is reconsidered, given the context of the surrounding houses and the precedent that has been set by previous developments in the immediate area.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for Mr. Newton? Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Newton. If you could just switch off the mic.
Thank you.
We next have one of the ward councillors, Councillor Jackie Porter. If you could come forward, Jackie. You have 5 minutes. You know about the microphone.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this morning. This application has been objected to by the parish council, but there was no need for them to call it in because there are sufficient local objections to this application to require it being to consider the planning committee today. This road has already had considerable infill, and the objections relate, in fact, to those properties where such careful work was done in order to make sure that they didn't have an impact on the properties that were there already. And that included the height. So there are 3 main objections from residents here, which I'll encompass from all of the objections rather than just from Mr. Newton's, although he's done a very good job of it. The first one is the road width and character and the risk of safety access. The road width is, the road is a private one, and in some cases it has a similar aspect to the last application, but it has sharp bends, restricted forward views and considerable green infrastructure and the hedges, etc. The larger development actually resulted in a new surface for this whole road. The road is managed by the Mortimer Close Residents Association, and I do suggest that if any decision is made to go forward with this, that the arrangements for renovation following construction should be made with that residents association via a bond to support the renovation not just of the road but of the green infrastructure that could happen as a result of it. I do realise this might be a private arrangement, but that's something that needs to be considered. That being said, there should be adequate space provided on this site for vehicles and visiting vehicles, not just during construction, but afterwards in use. There cannot be any expectation of provision for parking on the road at all. It's a single carriageway road, and if an emergency did occur, as did occur in the past, it's key that emergency vehicles can get through at all times. So really, it's a really important part of the construction plan here that's done. The second one is the height of the building. This has dormers and a roof height higher than other properties where roof heights have been lowered by cutting into the ground, and we're seeking to do at least the same here. The footprint of this doesn't look considerably larger than Rome Red itself, but Rome Red is a single-storey building and it is imposing, and it will create shadow particularly into Russet House below. And I am concerned about the impact on them and their garden and their light in their property. And I think that really has a consideration towards the difficulty of placing such a high building on that site. Also, it has dormers, and I note that 3 of them are going to be covered up because they'll be frosted or something similar. But there's no guarantee that that 4th window won't have a sight line into properties. I accept there's a tree there now, but that doesn't mean to say that the tree will be there in the future, and I would like to see that covered too. We've mentioned about cutting into the ground, and this would put this home into more context with its neighbours. The third one really is the lack of local consultation with residents. It's really regretted. It's disappointing as nobody thinks that this is not a suitable site for development. You know, there has been other development in the road, but it's disappointing because overlooking, positioning on the sites, many of the impacts on neighbouring properties could have been resolved with smaller compromises made earlier. These could be made as amendments or as conditions to the plan, and I'd urge the developer to reconsider that in the view of good design. And for that reason, I support the objections of the residents. I would actually like to add another objection on my part, or certainly a concern. The road has, it's about the impact on the wider network. All of the comments have been made on the local issue actually in that road, but at the end of that road, the traffic comes out onto the point where basically the school crossing patrol is held. A lot of children walk to school. There are 428 children at the school and a preschool, and there's a lot of children, and we know that at least 70% of them walk every day, and many of them use that crossing. So there is an impact on traffic at that junction, and I would urge that if any construction work is taking place, it comes outside of those hours of the school opening and closing. But also there is no path along Church Lane. So from the point of view of another building in this road, it's adding to the pressure of using cars potentially, because there is no real path that takes you all the way down Church Lane that's wide enough to take a person with a pushchair. And again, there was another crash at Cart and Horses this morning, with many vehicles, police, ambulances, oxygen masks, horrible. And so the impact of yet another building on this site is important, I think, to consider.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Members, do we have any questions of clarification? Could I just ask, so you wanted us to condition some things to mitigate the overlooking, the perceived overlooking, and
yes,
and that it should be dug in by another metre or so?
Yes, the previous applications in that road were taken down for buildings of a similar height.
I'll need to ask if we can do that, because I'm not sure that we're allowed to let go that far with conditions, but we'll see. Thank you very much. Any more questions of clarification for Councillor Porter? Thank you very much. And we now turn to the supporter, Philip Dudley, who's the agent or the applicant. Mr. Dudley, you have 3 minutes and your time will start when you start speaking.
Lovely, thank you, Chair and members. I'm the agent for this application. The site is within the settlement boundary, therefore development is acceptable, subject to the usual policies. It's important to understand that the character of the area has changed. The area around the site has been significantly developed over the years. This has changed the character of the area and has introduced front to back development. Therefore, the proposals for a new dwelling to the rear of Romar Ed simply reflect the pattern that is now established in the locality. It is not contrary to the village statement. The access on Morton's Close is already in existence to the existing dwelling. Again, this forms the now established character, and access to the new dwelling will continue this approach. The proposals have been designed using a digital land survey which accurately measures adjoining buildings and provides accurate ground and building levels. This ensures that the proposed dwelling fits appropriately in the context of the surrounding properties and levels. The design of the new dwelling has ensured all habitable rooms face towards the adjoining properties to the north and south of the site in order to achieve the adequate separation distances of 22 metres. Therefore, there are no overlooking or privacy issues. Suitable conditions can ensure appropriate screening and planting can be introduced to the boundaries with the retention of the trees. Position of the new dwelling in relation to Russett's house and Leaflands provides adequate separation distances as shown on the site plan drawings. Therefore, the impact is not detrimental to the adjoining properties. The overall development achieves the same density as the adjoining houses, and the site has to be viewed in context with the surrounding area, which has seen change. There are no statutory objections from highways, ecology, drainage or landscaping. This is a policy compliant site and achieves the aims and objectives of the NPPF and local plan policies. The application provides an opportunity to integrate a new dwelling into the existing character of the area that has been established by the adjoining developments. I trust that you will follow the recommendation and permit this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions for clarification? Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. We heard from previous people that this is much higher than the surrounding properties. Is there any reason why that's so important to you? Why can't you have reduced it to the same height as the rest of the...
Have you got the street scene? Sorry, I'll just recall my street scene thing because I can't. I think the I think it is slightly higher than Russet House, but I think what if you look on the street scene, that I can't see the adjoining properties on it. I mean, the ridge height, yes, is slightly higher than the adjoining properties. That's just because of the design of the house. I mean, I'm not a great fan of flat top roofs because they're a maintenance issue, and I don't necessarily see they achieve anything. The windows are still there, the same height. So all you're doing is cutting off the top. I don't necessarily think it achieves anything. So I prefer, from a design point of view, I think it looks better with a fully pitched and ridge tile on it. And I don't think it provides any additional impact to the adjoining dwellings by being slightly higher.
And the same as we hear that the previous local development was dug into the ground for a biometer. What's your objection to that?
At the moment, I have shown it being dug in, not quite as much as a metre, but I would say it's probably about half a metre from the existing ground levels. It has been dug in, but obviously, if you dig that one in too much, the garden to Romar Ed, you're going to be looking at an over a metre and a half retaining wall to their garden. So there's a compromise between how far you dig it in without causing a lot of engineering works around the site. But I have dug it in slightly to try and achieve a more compatible dwelling within the surrounding area and the levels.
Any further questions of clarification for Mr. Dudley? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Dudley. You may return to your seat. Megan, do you have any additional contributions before we move to questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to update on Councillor Porter's comments about the conditions proposed that she requested. There is a condition regarding levels on the application proposed, but we can't change the levels now. We can't condition that to be changed. We have, however, conditioned a landscaping proposed to the whole site, but specifically to the north boundary and the southern boundary, and the retention of that tree. And if anything dies within 5 years, it's written in that condition that they should be replanted as well. There is also condition number 21 is a construction management plan, which details shall be submitted to us before development commences. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Megan. I'll take questions on the whole report to Megan. Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Could you just clarify on page 97 the actual access? I'm going to put the photo on the screen.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that is the access to the north.
Is it the first one or the next one after that proposed access?
That one?
Yeah.
Yes. So it's not the proposed access for the dwelling. It's to the north of the site, which accesses the dwellings to the south. So those 4 semi-detached properties to the rear, it accesses them, and then there's a carport here, so they drive round, and there's a parking area in front of the houses here.
Okay. When I'm looking on Google Maps, I'm just looking at the access into the site. There's, if I've got it right, it's off Mortimer Close, is that correct? Yeah, so it's quite a mature hedge there. I'm concerned of the visual display when they're trying to come out of that new road, new road.
Towards the front?
Yeah.
Yes.
Would they have enough visual display?
The existing site at Romar Ed has a driveway that goes into the site.
Mm-hmm.
If you can see it on the cursor, into the site here, and then comes out at the point to the north where they are proposing the new existing access. Therefore, there'd be no change to the amount of traffic using that, and therefore it's acceptable in highways turn.
It's actually a visual display of coming out of the new road onto the main road.
Onto the main road right at the end.
That,
Oh, that
actual-
bit.
That bit, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
that's acceptable because it's already used as a driveway.
I'm just thinking about the safety concern of trying to come out there, whether there's enough visual display or not. If the hedges still exist, can stay there.
As it's already being used, apparently it's acceptable. And it's only one extra house. That's what we're told. Okay, any more questions for Megan on this? Can I ask about overlooking? So, overlooking particularly to Russet House. Yeah, that's the one. So those dormer windows, are they the ones that are servicing bathrooms and basically obscure glazed?
Yes,
Or is
that's
it the other
right.
way
That's
around?
correct. So you can see on the first floor plan, so there are 3 bathrooms to the rear, and these are all proposed to be obscurely glazed and have been conditioned as such.
Will they be opening windows?
Yes.
Is it possible to condition top opening windows?
I don't know in terms of building regulations whether that would be allowed. I don't know if we can condition that.
So the windows that potentially would overlook Russet House are actually all obscure glazed, and the only one that's on the other side of the tree, that's the bedroom window. But
that's correct.
But that's got the tree there, which is conditioned to stay.
Yes.
And that boundary is conditioned. We've got a plan coming that will reinforce that boundary, have we?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the other distances are considered that it's not an overlooking issue, is that right? Or
that's correct. I've assessed it and I don't think that there's a material planning harm in terms of overlooking from those other windows.
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Lamy.
Picking up on the point that Councillor Porter made, can we condition that there's no construction traffic between sort of, say 8 and 9:30? Because it is a dangerous road with the number of school children going up.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's, a reasonable question, and where there's a major development, I think there would, you can work with the county council about routing and times. It wouldn't be enforceable in my view, Chair. How can we stop people being on the highway? I just don't think that that's reasonable. We could put an informative on or something to sort of guide and recommend, and then when Megan is looking at the construction management plan, she can reinforce that request. But we certainly can't condition that in my view.
Perhaps we can add to the informative the hours that the road, the main road, the access road, Church Lane, will be busy with school traffic, and that it should be avoided by construction traffic. I think that's the most that we can do, isn't it? Okay. Is it reasonable to request that permitted development rights be removed from this house, given that it really is, I think, at the limit of the plot size? So that doesn't mean that they would never be allowed to have an extension. It just means that any garden buildings or extensions would be required to go through the planning process and be properly assessed. Would that be reasonable? Have we already done that? I missed that condition.
Chairman, while Megan's just looking up, members will know that, from our training and from national guidance, that we should only impose planning conditions when they meet a series of tests set out nationally, and that's proportionate, relevant to the development, enforceable, required, necessary, and another word I can't remember just now. But in terms of the plot size here, removing someone's permitted development is quite a big thing, and national guidance does recommend against it unless you can demonstrate harm. What we're finding is it removes people's rights to add a garden shed or do anything. And the national permitted development rights are there to say that people can sort of extend and alter within the criteria, modest alterations. I'm not sure, your officer view is that we shouldn't do that unless there's, a strong justification for that. And I think preventing that, in my view, probably isn't justified in this case, Chair.
Well, I think it would be justified. And I would like to propose that because I think this is definitely the edge of, particularly given the character of the area and the open gardens and everything else, I think that enabling any more development on this site would go against the character of the area and should definitely at least have the oversight of the planning process.
I just interject. It could be removed for, if it depends what you're worried about, but you could remove it just for any roof extensions, for example, if you're particularly worried about that, or you're worried about additional sheds and extensions.
Well, what do other members of the committee think? Councillor Laming.
As you know, in my ward, we have a lot of permitted development rights removed, and it works quite well. And I would support the removal of that on this occasion.
I do think that permitted development rights have gone a long way, and that, could take up significant, space in that garden if they built to the permitted development rights size, which I think would significantly detract from the area and from the character. So I really do think that we could justify it in this.
So all permitted development rights, or what?
Chairman, I think Megan did recommend to you that you could just remove certain classes from the Town and Country Planning Act. So Class A, which would enable someone to extend their house, Class B and C, which deal with roof alterations, I think. And then you wouldn't necessarily need to remove Class D, which deals with porches, and Class E, which deals with outbuildings. So I strongly recommend you only remove those classes where you think there would be some harm as a result of it, because, if someone puts up a garden shed and they haven't applied for planning permission, the expectation is we'll take enforcement action. Well, of course we can't if it's reasonable to have a garden shed. So I think you do need to be careful.
So if we removed A,
if you moved A to C, I think,
I
go to the heart of your concerns.
I propose, therefore, that we remove the permitted development rights A to C from this plot, should we agree to give it planning permission. So that would be an additional condition. Is that agreed, members? Thank you.
Can I just make a point?
Yes, Councillor Lane.
What we've seen is, particularly in our area, where people have put up garden roofs and claimed that they were garden sheds, and we've expanded on that. So I, through experience, say that we just remove permitted development rights.
Well, we've been told that that would not be reasonable. I tend to agree that that would not be reasonable. So but I think we've done as much as we can in this case, Councillor Laming. Right. If there are no more questions to our officer on the report, we move to debate. Okay, well, I will start, probably finished by the sound of things. I mean, these back garden developments are always difficult, particularly where there has not been the sort of engagement with the local community that we would all hope to see. And I think there are several aspects about this application which concern me. I would have liked to have seen access into the plot, not using the existing access, but one from the new road that gets to other new houses in the area. But it's not up to the planning committee to decide, and that was not an option, I understand, in this case. So I am concerned, but I think the concerns about overlooking, particularly over to Russet House, are either mitigated or they're not there. They're just bathroom windows which will be obscure glazed. I don't think there's a question of overlooking in other directions. It is a relatively small plot, but that's the way things are going in this particular area. There's been a lot of development recently. We have agreed the new informative about school times and limiting construction traffic during those times, and we will see and agree a landscaping plan, and that will take into account ecological initiatives and in reinforcing the planting around the boundaries. So hopefully that will also help to mitigate any issues with the neighbours. So with those in mind, with the removal of permitted development rights A to C, and having considered all the issues, particularly in the report, but this morning as well, I am content that this does fall within our planning policies, and therefore I will be supporting the officer recommendation. Any further contributions to debate? Councillor Lee.
We heard that there's maybe some constraints in lowering the building into the ground site, and given the character of some of the other houses with a flat roof, I'm just wondering whether is there something that can be considered to ameliorate that in particular?
We can't require it to go further in. I think if you look at we've seen the plans, it is on a slightly sloping plot, and is going to be dug in at one end, obviously not the other, because it'll be a flat house. I think that it fits within the roofscape of the neighbouring properties, looking at these, given the information we've been given. I don't think overshadowing, a certain amount of overshadowing is acceptable, isn't it? I don't think it's a concern. No, our officer has assessed the potential for overshadowing. It is not something that comes within it's not a planning reason to refuse, shall we say that. I'm sorry, we have to work with the information that we're given by our officers, and they do check everything, so I'm confident that it is correct. And I know that the developer himself actually is living in the bungalow now, so I'm sure that he will be keen to keep on the good side of his neighbours and do everything he can to mitigate the development. Right. Can I see all those in favour of this application with the changes that we've agreed? All members, so that is approved. Thank you very much. We'll have a short break, 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to item number 8.
Read decides to switch off. Okay. Right, our next application, item number 8 on your agenda, is at 3 Agent Close in Winchester. Our presenting officer is Cameron Finch, so if you'd like to give us your presentation, please, Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for construction of a 2-storey side extension to an existing 4-bedroom small HMO, use class C4 to provide 2 additional bedrooms, and we have received amended drawings for this application. So we first have a location plan. So the site outline there is hatched. So you can see the pattern of development. It sits at the end of a terrace and then on a corner, slightly raised up. So just to note that from the north to the south, the ground level does rise slightly. And then to the northeast there, you can see residential gardens for 1 and 2 Agent Close, which the extension sits on the boundary of. So then we have an aerial photograph, start showing the location approximately of just where that extension would sit, and then a clearer image there of the pattern of development in this area. So then we have the proposed site plan. So this hatched square here, this is the proposed extension. You can see the extent of the boundary here of the site. Also 2 car parking spaces there proposed to be added at the front of the site. Agent Close is here, and then Firmstone Road is just off the top of the site plan. So we have the existing elevations, so currently an end terrace. And then the proposed elevations, the 2-storey extension there, the ground floor projecting slightly further forward than the first floor, and then just seeing it where it stops at the boundary here on this proposed side elevation. And then we have proposed floor plans just showing the extent of the facilities this will provide. So it is 2 additional bedrooms, and then we also have an additional toilet on the first floor, and then toilet bathroom on the ground floor. And you can also there see the parking spaces proposed as well. So this is an image facing in from Agent Close. So you can see the side there of 1 and 2, and the extension would be sited behind where that tall hedge is there. Just noting some of that hedge would be removed to accommodate the parking. And then the side on view and the boundary wall with the neighbouring gardens can be seen there as well. Just a slightly wider view, sort of showing the entire corner of Agent Close and Firmstone Road, just to give a better impression of how it would sit. And then finally a long-term view looking up Firmstone Road. Recommendation is to permit.
Thank you very much. We now turn to public speaking. Mr. Bone, the objector. Good morning, Mr. Bone. Or is it morning? No, it's afternoon. Sorry about that. You have 3 minutes when you're ready, when you start to speak. Thank you.
This extension will completely block the light to the gardens of number 1 and 2 from midday till about 6 p.m. The shadow analysis omits the period between midday and 6 p.m. conveniently. So there'll be overshadowing, especially in the garden of number 1. So there won't be any light in that garden at all, really, in one end of it. The garden is only 4.5 metres by 4.5 metres. She spent a lot of time doing it. Laid a lawn, put new fencing up, a deck, paved it all. There won't be any vegetation, sunlight to it. This goes ahead.
Thank you.
questions of clarification? Members, so you're talking about the garden to number 2? To number 1?
Number 1 specifically, but number 2 as well.
Okay. So are those numbers the right way around?
The first floor one is the garden next to this proposed extension, which is number 1.
All right, well, we'll raise that with the officer. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a bit misleading the way they've done it.
All right.
The
thank you.
overshadowing is complete.
All right, well, we'll
Not to mention, when the construction starts, all the people up that road will be severely impacted.
construction again is something we will speak to the officer about, but thank you very much indeed. Any more questions for our contributor? Nope. You may return to your seat. Thank you very much indeed.
Just one thing.
Yes.
The lady who lives in number 1 is currently negotiating with the council to buy it. She's got approval for a mortgage. If this goes ahead, I think that will affect that.
Right, well, if you could switch off your microphone when you go back to your seat, thank you very much. We now have Councillor John Tippett Cooper, who's one of the local ward councillors. John, you have up to 5 minutes, and the time will start when you start speaking.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for permitting me to speak today, which I'm very grateful to receive. Now, with this application, I entirely respect the officer's views on it. I'm hugely grateful for the work they do and the careful thought they put into these planning applications. And I make these comments on this application in light of that overall comment. So this application is effectively intended to expand an HMO and to squeeze in occupants in the house originally intended as a family home. For, I dare say, the relatively minor benefit of having 2 extra occupants, or possibly maybe a higher income for the current occupants. And it's deemed in this plan application, the benefit of this outweighs the very clear impact on the local community in this part of Winnall. So I fear the subjective elements to the recommendation that permit planning application here perhaps underplay the impacts that are listed in the reasons for recommendation. So turning to the reasons for recommendation in front of you, so the application is deemed to be acceptable in terms of its impact on the character of the area. On this, I urge officers to consider carefully the objections that have been received from a number of residents in the local community in and around Badging Close about their view about the adverse impact of the area. Mr. Tony Hill, who is here today, has put an eloquent 10-point objection on this and talks about how, for example, this area was originally in the local plan intended for family use and occupancy, and the committee will really need to be conscious of that when considering this application. The recommendation says that this is acceptable and that it would not harm neighbouring residential amenity. And indeed, the planning balance in conclusion says this proposal does not result in any material planning harm on the surrounding residential amenities. Now, again, entirely respect the officer's view, but to suggest this development would not harm neighbouring residential amenity is plainly incorrect. The City of Winchester Trust made clear in their objection that the extension would have a negative impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties through increased noise, overlooking, overshadowing, late night activities and parking problems. That's their view. My former colleague, Councillor Ferguson, who did a site visit, her objection sets it out well. It explains that the building will cause overshadowing, a loss of amenity to the residents in the maisonettes at number 1, they are maisonettes incidentally, in the maisonettes at number 1 and number 2, Badging Close. Badging Close is on a hill and number 3 sits higher than both number 1 and number 2. And this means the proposed extension will not only take away their light, but may also affect number 1 and number 2's privacy, as the new first-storey window at the back will look directly into their garden and potentially into their windows. So effectively, this development plunges number 1 and number 2 Badging Close into near darkness for very large parts of the day. I think the recommendation says it's from midday onwards they will have no light. And it also has a very real impact on their privacy. So in addition to the other problems identified by the residents and consultees like the City of Winchester Trust, the harm to the neighbouring residents cannot be reasonably considered acceptable in my view. Finally, it says that it's acceptable. The recommendation says it's acceptable and that it complies with the policies of the adopted development plan. I defer to the planning committee on its understanding of these policies, but in addition to the points already made, I'd also emphasise there's an understandable concern here about the loss of open green space and the ecological impact of that. Again, I reiterate that sacrifice is made for the virtue of squeezing in a bit more space in an HMO, which is essentially what this is. And indeed, we would effectively be granting precedence over that then in ensuring there's adequate green spaces in the community. So, Chair, this part of the Wymondham community has a strong and supportive community of individuals, couples and families that have pride in their local area and want to see it thrive. As a city, we also have a thriving and welcome student and young professional community who bring economic and cultural benefits to our city. And the vast majority of the time, they live in perfect harmony with the local community while living in HMOs. But the housing needs of these groups do conflict at times, and there's always a difficult balance to strike. And I think in this case, the balance, I believe, and residents believe, falls squarely ensuring that we do not sacrifice the quality of living of many local residents in Badging Close for what is a very limited gain the other way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tipper-Cooper. Any questions of clarification, members? I think that was quite clear. Thank you. You may return to your seat. Okay, we don't have a supporter, so we return to Cameron. Do you want to add anything, Cameron, after the public speaking, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to clarify, number 1 and 2, so they are maisonettes, one on the ground floor, and then there's a first floor one as well. Number 2 being served by the one closest, and then the garden to number 1 being there, this one. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Avery.
Thank you, Chair. Good. We had a few mentions there about the overshadowing impact, so I just wanted to provide more information on that from the office assessment. The application was submitted with a shadow analysis, but beyond that, as officers do for developments such as this, we've looked at the orientation as well, and the case officer's report does acknowledge that there may be some interruption to evening sun just due to the orientation of the extension, but there's no reason for refusal on that basis, and we're satisfied as officers that there's no overshadowing impact from the extension.
This is a 2-storey extension to the south of the garden, servicing flat number 2. So, and you're saying there's no overshadowing?
Yes, it's to the west. So peak sunlight, midday sunlight wouldn't be interrupted. So potential for evening sunlight, but that's been assessed in the officer's report.
Southwest? Southwest, perhaps? I mean, it looks quite south of the garden, doesn't it? Isn't that marker there shows that north is sort of going that direction?
Yes, and it is just the dark shaded area on that site plan as well for the extension. So what you're seeing to the south is the existing house already.
Yes. All right, thank you. So we've considered the possibility of overshadowing and it's not significant.
Yes, correct. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I can confirm I visited twice to the site, both during the morning and afternoon. So once in the winter and then once in the late summer.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, members, on the whole report? Councillor Lee.
I have a question about the open green space comment that was made. Is there an understanding of how much open green space is in this area? This is not particularly big. Can you comment on that? And another question was about the ratio of HMO to single homeowners and so on. Is there any sort of guidance that we should be adhering to? Is there a level when it becomes perhaps not sustainable? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dealing with the green space first. So if I just show this image here. So the proposed extension is contained entirely within the boundary of this site. So you can see here there's a close bordered fence. So it doesn't encroach on any space or green space that would be public. So in terms of amenity that the public can already use, there's no loss to that. You have this green space just here on the other side of the boundary. And then the extension is entirely closed within the site. Granted, there's a limited amount of loss from the hedge, but that hasn't tipped it over into unacceptable. In terms of HMO, it is an existing HMO, so we're not granting permission for a new HMO here. It is literally just the extension. We do have a policy for Winnall, which I think outlines ratios for HMOs, but that hasn't come into play with this application as it is just an extension. Thank you, Chair.
Can I ask about the HMO? So it's up to 6 people. It's already got a license for up to 6 people. And that won't change with this extension.
So it is within the existing T4 area, so the small HMOs, and it remains within that for planning purposes.
But because they're all, I mean, there will be 5 bedrooms, so there'll be at least 5 separate individuals or 1 couple and 4 individual, whatever. Are there only 2 parking spaces? Is that adequate?
So in our assessment of the overall parking, we've taken into account, so they're actually adding 2 parking spaces that don't exist currently. We've also taken into account that there is residential parking within the wider surrounding area as well that they would have access to. And then further to that, we've also looked at things like the accessibility of the site, how easy it is to access via public transport. So within 5-minute walk, there are bus links into the city and also to the train station. So within the officer's report, we've outlined it is quite a sustainable site in terms of access. So we're happy to accept the 2 parking spaces.
Is there any provision for secure cycle parking, for instance?
Thank you, Chair. None specifically specified within the application that they potentially they would be able to store bikes on site. We haven't specified it through the application, though.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My advice would be that there is sufficient space within the rest of the garden outside of the extension area for them to implement it if they wish. So I wouldn't recommend a condition, but that there is space to do it if that need arises.
Okay. I know it's a very small, in terms of the wider context, it's a very small development. Do we have some sort of plan for the construction, traffic and so on? Do we agree that with these small developments?
Chair, it's not reasonable on a single sort of extension like this to require a construction management plan. And just, Chair, while I've got you, we're just checking the plans, and there is shown on the proposed site plan a cycle storage in the garden already, so that is covered.
And we have an informative about construction and being neighbourly and not blocking the roads and all that. Okay. Can you just tell me about the different levels, because that was raised by the objector that this site is significantly higher than the neighbouring site, and therefore that would contribute to the overshadowing potential.
Thank you, Chair. So you can see with this image, there is a slight rise between where Fernstone Road is and then Bagent Close as it continues up southwards. Looking at it, we've seen a small increase or difference in the site levels between number 3 and then the amenity space for number 2, but not significant enough that it would aggravate a significant or additional overshadowing impact of what we've identified. So it comes within that level that we've accepted in the afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just get the elevation. So if we look at the side elevation there, it's just to point out as well that there is a height difference from the ridge height as well, obviously being set back from the rear elevation and also set down from the top as well. So just to clarify that relationship. Thank you.
And there are no windows looking out at the back or just a one at the top of the stairs, is that right?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So that window serves a hallway, and we have proposed a condition number 4. So that window shall be obscure glazed and non-opening, to mitigate that, as it's not an area where we would expect a sustained overlooking impact, but just putting that condition on there should secure that.
Right, we have Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I notice on the plans it doesn't show the Velux window in the attic, but on the photographs there's a Velux window. In terms of the HMO discussion we've just had as well, is that relevant in terms of whether bedroom space might be pushed up into that if it doesn't already exist?
Thank you, Chair. So from an internal visit, my understanding is there is not a bedroom in there at the current moment in time, and that this is effectively what we've got. So as I say, the nature of those ones, to have any sort of amenable space in those areas would require sort of an extension to the roof. So we have confirmed at the moment that there is nothing in there. So the 5 bedrooms that this would create would still basically that's what we're expecting by recommending permission here.
As a one-time student, I think you'll find that there's room up there.
Councillor Laming.
With this extension, it takes the number of bedrooms up. Does that also mean that we have to then consider the parking spaces in this? Because if I remember rightly, we have to have so many car parking spaces per bedroom. Is that the case in this?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, as we say, in the sustainable transport section of the officer's report, we have looked at the parking spaces. So it is an additional 2 spaces that don't exist at the moment. And then we've also taken into account the residential parking available for them in the area, and also the associated transport links into the city and off to the train station as well, in assessing it, and we've assessed it as sufficient.
Thank you, Cameron. I don't expect that you should have to answer the same question twice. I did ask about the parking, Councillor.
I haven't finished yet, Chair.
Yeah, you may continue.
My supplementary.
All right,
so if I'm
please
allowed
have your
to carry on.
supplementary.
Have you assessed this against Hampshire County Council's policy of driveways on corners? Because there is a limit, if I remember rightly, from when we had this come up before on Badger Farm.
Thank you, Chair. So with this one, because it's not off of what we call a classified road, they don't need to seek planning permission to do a dropped curb here. So it's not something that's formed part of the planning assessment for this. Of course, there are separate regulations, of course, when they do apply to Hampshire, and they would need to look into that, but it hasn't formed part of the material planning judgment of the application because they're not required. It's not required on this road.
Councillor Lee.
I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to check. Is this counted as a new build, or is this, because there's an extension, is it a retrofit in some way? And the reason I ask that question is the overheating issue, and picking up on Councillor Bolton's point about low roof space and heat. You know, as rising temperatures happen, it's the comfort levels of the occupants I'm concerned about. So is this going to be complying fully with the new overheating regulations?
Thank you, Chair. As it's an extension to an existing residential dwelling, so those points haven't formed part of the assessment of the application, just because, as I say, it's been taken as an extension. It's not forming a brand new unit or anything like that. So it hasn't formed, or it doesn't form part of the material planning judgment here.
My concern is, I think if I'm right, overheating the higher regulations have to be applied to new build, not to retrofit. Am I right in saying that? And if that is the case, can we condition that perhaps overheating is considered?
So I think you'll find that's a building regulation matter. This is an extension to an existing dwelling that's occupied as a HMO, and I think it would go well beyond our planning powers to condition that for an extension to an existing dwelling occupied as a HMO, Chair.
And as far as this application is concerned and the information that we've been given, there isn't a habitable room in the roof space, which I think is your concern that should overheat. So it's a planning regulation. It's not a planning application matter. Right. Any more questions? Debate. Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. This does give me a great deal of concern with the overshadowing and particularly the parking element of it. I was on the committee when we looked at Harrowdown, where we turned down the application because of the driveway in proximity to a road junction, and I don't think that this beats with that, and I haven't had any clarification that to suggest otherwise, so I cannot go along with this particular one.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the sort of HMO situation, I am slightly concerned that this may end up where there's an over occupancy if they feel the need or the desire to start occupying the attic space or filling the attic space. And, you know, who's to know if they put a staircase in there at a later date. So I don't know where that might go and whether that would tip it over the edge in terms of the ramifications locally and HMO regulations. But so that is my main concern about it. And I wonder whether there's the possibility of some condition to prevent that situation occurring. And I defer to your better judgment.
If I could just point you to page 100 under general comments. If the applicant wishes to increase the number of residents within the property above 6 persons, an application would be required for a large HMO use class. So they would have to change their registered HMO situation, which one would assume would be quite a major thing to have to do. So I think that they're limited to up to 6.
Okay, thank you.
I think yeah. Sorry, we're in debate. More debate. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. This morning, we've had 2 other cases where overshadowing has been suggested. And in both cases, I have to say I had a slight chuckle because in the second one, the building was to the north. However, in this case, if you look at the photographs, I think it's going to have a very severe effect on the adjacent garden and cut out all the west-facing light. Now, I haven't seen any solar pattern charts of it, and I know the planners said the effect is minor, but to me, and looking at the photographs of on page 116, you can see the shadow from a house the other side of the street being cast. And I think in the evenings, all the light would be taken out of that garden. And to me, it seems it would be interfering with, you know, the residents of 1 and 2, their quiet enjoyment of their garden. And so I don't think I can support this.
Councillor Lee.
We talked about green space, and I understand the response. And there is parking provision for 2 cars. And I'm just wondering whether there's a compromise position available to try and ensure that we do retain some of the boundary hedge, i.e. to break up this built environment with the extension. Is there some way that we can work towards that?
We're in debate, so that's a bit difficult, really. I think it is what is in front of us, Councillor Lee. We have to make a determination on the images in front of us and the information we've been given by our officers. If you don't like it, vote against it. If you think you can find a planning reason to support that. Okay, anybody else? I have to agree with Councillor Gordon-Smith. I am very concerned about the overshadowing of the gardens behind. However, we have been told by our officer that he has assessed this and that he doesn't consider it to be significant. So I am torn, but I do agree that the look from that photograph, it may well have been taken quite late in an evening, and he did admit that there would be evening overshadowing. We have been known to turn down major applications on the basis of overshadowing of parts of amenity areas, haven't we? So but I remain to be convinced that it's enough to turn this down. Difficult one, really. Anybody else for debate? No. Okay, time to make a decision, members. So this application is recommended to us for approval. Can I see all those in favour? Those against? And I'm an can't make up my mind. So abstentions. I'm an abstention. So that application is refused. No, it isn't. That motion falls. So now we have to find some planning reasons to turn it down and then vote again. So can I have your planning reasons? Councillor Gordon-Smith, you gave a very clear one. Unacceptable.
To me, it seems the overshadowing, I mean, this is, I calculated exactly just by eye, but my house in Alresford has a building next to it, and in the evening the sunlight goes. And this is a situation where it's a much smaller garden and so on, and it would seem a valid reason. I mean, it may be, I could be convinced if I was shown a solar chart showing it, and it's quite easy to do, and be convinced otherwise, but at the moment I think it's an adequate reason to turn it down.
So, Chair, I think you've obviously voted against the officer recommendation to approve. What you now need to give us as a committee is those reasons why you want to refuse this. And I think if it just helps you, looking at on the site plan, you can see the north point. It's not facing directly up. It's just off to the right slightly, isn't it here? And then if you've obviously got your east and your south. Number 3 already would cast shadow the southern part of the day, given its 2-storey height across the gardens, particularly probably to number 1, which is to the rear of this. So there would be some limited loss of sort of later afternoon light to that garden, but there would, when it was due west, you would get, there's a gap, isn't there, through between the proposed 2-storey extension and number 2. So there would be some evening sunlight there, albeit much later as the sun is setting. And I think, Rob explained to you that this 2-storey extension is subservient. It's set down, it looks to be set down well over a metre. It doesn't extend as far back as the rear elevation of number 3. So that was the context and the shadowing diagram that Rob and Cameron set out to you. So what we need to understand from you is it's a degree of harm, isn't it, as a result of the 2-storey extension, to the loss of that sort of later afternoon sunlight into that garden that's causing you concern. And you need to articulate that for us in terms of identifying a planning harm and then reason for refusal, Chair.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just offer this attempt to approach that challenge we've been set by our officer. I think there is something about the design of the corner, the characteristic design of the neighbourhood, with the 2 terraces ending in blank walls separated from each other at the corner, which allows light and visibility into and from the gardens behind. I believe it's reflected on the other opposite corner and elsewhere in the estate. And there's an additional reason, though my principal reason for objection is the light and overshadowing. But an additional one might be the interference with the traditional established character of the buildings.
I think, Chairman, that wasn't necessarily something that came up through debate, was it? And I think, you know, there are lots of corner plots like this in this area where there have been or could be two-storey side extensions. You know, spatially, you know, with that bit of open space that does exist beyond the existing hedgerow here, you know, your officer views, I think, be hard to substantiate harm to character. And I think what members said is that they feel there is some overshadowing here. And if I refer you to DM 17, Roman numeral 7, that does talk about the whether a proposal has an unacceptable adverse impact on adjoining land uses or property by reason of overlooking, overshadowing or being overbearing. And I think from what I've heard, that was where the essence of the committee's debate came from. I don't want to put words in your mouth, that needs to be your reason for refusal, but you know, that seems to me where you were sort of expressing concern in terms of your debate.
Thank you, Mrs. Pennick, that was very clear. So with that reason for refusal, I put this back to the committee by reason of unreasonable overshadowing of neighbouring gardens. So we are now proposing that this application be refused on that basis. Can I see those in favour of that refusal? 7 members. And those against and abstentions?
We delegate the final. Sharon, with your permission, we'll delegate the exact final wording with you.
Yes.
To agree before we issue any decision.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we will squeeze one more in, so we will now move on to item number 9. The same presenter, so shouldn't take any time to swap over presenters. I should just say, if anybody's waiting for item number 10 on the agenda, that will be deferred now until after lunch, so that will be at 2 p.m. Okay, so item number 9, 2 Quarry Business Park, Lower Lane, Bishop's Waltham, and our presenting officer is Cameron Finch again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for change of use of the above mentioned premises from Class E, commercial business and service, to Class B8, storage or distribution, together with associated external alterations. So we have the location plan here. So the site outline in red, not including Unit 1 or Unit 3, which are under separate tenants. So gives an idea of the pattern of development here. So yew trees, which is a number of flats, which sits immediately next to it. And then at a distance somewhat, there are some neighbouring residential properties. And then the elderly person's home is there to the northeast, set a little bit further away. Just to give you some context, now do note, this is the latest aerial imagery that we have for this site. It shows the original building prior to this site being redeveloped, but it just gives you an idea of sort of surrounding development and where this sits and the proximity of residential dwellings. But as I say, the site has been redeveloped. Unfortunately, this is the most recent aerial image available. So here we have the proposed elevation. So it is very simple here, as you'll see from the images further on. They're covering some windows just to allow that storage use in the main warehouse part, and then a change to the door, all in colours that match the existing scheme. So then we have the proposed layout here. So in the bottom left corner of where you can see the actual unit, that's the small trade counter, the ancillary trade counter area of this unit. Then proposing there is a small amount of office space and amenity space for employees of the site, and then vast majority of this unit being used for the storage of goods. So this is a proposed site plan with the vehicle tracking of a large vehicle. So what this shows is a large vehicle coming into the site, being able to deliver to the unit, and then actually, if you see the vehicle tracking, move to the rear, turn around, and then is able to exit the site in a forward gear without fouling any of the parking spaces that are provided on site. Just for reference, you can see here outside Unit 2, there are 4 parking spaces plus a disabled bay. And then further down the site, there is more sort of overflow available parking within the site. So this is the view of the units from the access on Lower Lane earlier this year. So we've got the car garage at the front. The rear of the site is currently in a temporary use Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service, but that is only while their site in Bishop's Waltham is being redeveloped. And then the tenant would be in the middle unit. So then we have the front elevation there, so that just shows how it is as existing. Some of those areas being covered up by those proposed external changes that you saw earlier in the presentation. And then just a couple of views from within the site. So one looking out east towards the exit. This development is using the existing access. And then also then looking further down into the site where you can see the change of levels and then some parking up towards the rear. So this is looking north along Lower Lane from that existing access just up there. And then looking south towards Bishop's Waltham, and you can just inside that picture also see yew trees, which is the flats that neighbour this site. In conclusion, recommendation is to permit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cameron. We now turn to our public speaking. We have Anthony Feeble, objector. Lovely. If you'd like to come forward, please. Thank you. You will have 3 minutes and the clock will start when you start speaking. If you just like to switch on your microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking today on behalf of the 10 flats, residents of the 10 flats within yew trees, of which I'm one. Yew trees is situated about approximately 25 metres away from Quarry Business Park, and as such, there are 3 areas of concern on which we base our objections. Area 1, noise, air quality, and light quality. Noise obviously would be associated with customer vehicles turning in, vehicle doors and boots opening and closing, loading of goods, and perhaps significantly deliveries. At what time of day, we don't quite know yet, but on previous Screwfix sites, 6 o'clock in the morning till 6:30 a.m. and evenings 8 o'clock to 8:30. ES Acoustics have predicted noise level readings for various times of the week and weekends relating to background noise and customer visits. Noise levels that they have predicted are only going to be higher during the delivery windows. I wonder whether this is going to be an accurate figure. As far as I can see, or as I can find, there's no data relating to in planning application documents relating to change in air and light quality. Is it even a planning requirement? Most all the flats will be subject to increase in noise levels and decrease in air quality. The 5 flats on the north side overlooking the site will have the worst of the noise and air pollution, as well as being affected by light pollution from illuminated signs, of which one is already in place on Unit 1. Looking at a normal Screwfix sign, it's quite big. Area 2 is a highway, and this is of great concern to all residents and has been for a number of years. There is a 40-mile speed limit on the B3035, and from hangars to the station roundabout. And I would suggest that adherence to this limit is not always the norm. The large number of vehicle movements and the position of the entrance exit would inevitably create dangers and problems for the local traffic, especially when very large group vehicles are attempting to access or leave the site. Accidents and near misses have already occurred from turning into yew trees. Another entrance on this site will only increase chances of one. Finally, Area 3 usage. Screwfix estimate that 38 customers will visit the site each day on an average, of which 4 will walk, 2 will cycle, 1 will use public transport, 31 will arrive in a car or a van, hence 62 entrances and exits. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Members, do we have any questions or clarification for Mr. Beeble? Councillor Bolton.
Just one question for you. I can't quite determine from the pictures and everything what the nature of the screening is between yew tree and the site.
A very low hedge.
It's a very low hedge. Thank you.
Very low. 3 foot at most, not even that, I should think. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, Anthony, you've obviously done a lot of research. Mentioned Screwfix, which I guess is the intended occupant. Can you just say a bit more about what you think the hours of operation are? I think you said 8 to 8:30 in the evening. And
We've got a condition that covers the hours of operation.
It does. I just wanted to clarify the weekend operations.
It's 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock weekdays. 7 o'clock to, I'm not sure on a Saturday, I can't verify one, and 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock on a Sunday, and deliveries normally are 6 to 6:30 in the morning and 8 to 8:30 in the evening.
Mr. Beeble, we have a condition.
Thank you.
In our documents, there is a condition that says that no machinery shall be operated and no deliveries taken or dispatched from the site except between the hours of 8 in the morning and 2100 hours, that's 9 o'clock in the evening, Monday to Friday, 8 till 1 on Saturday, and at no times on Sundays and bank holidays. So that is a condition of this planning application.
Or the deliveries.
Or the deliveries and anything
Yeah.
noisy. Is that right, Councillor?
Yeah, I can clarify if you'd like. Yes, so that was a condition recommended by our colleagues in environmental health when, through their assessment, potential harm caused by deliveries to the site. So that relates to deliveries. This site has never had anything that limits operational hours on it through the original permission. So operational hours slightly different, but in terms of deliveries and then noisy machinery, we are limiting through that condition.
Okay, thank you. I hope that helps to reassure you. Any more questions of? No, thank you very much. You may return. Thank you very much to your seat. Thank you. Okay, we now move to the ward councillor, Jonathan Williams. Jonathan, if you'd like to come forward. Councillor Williams, you have 5 minutes. You know the routine. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm speaking predominantly, I've been contacted by residents sharing concerns predominantly around lighting, traffic and noise. I've also been contacted through my role as a parish councillor in Bishop's Waltham, asking to support their comments in opposition regarding this application, and the chair, vice chair of the planning committee send their apologies. To reiterate from the presentation, Bishop's Waltham Depot is sandwiched between Bishop's Waltham Care Home and Yew Trees. Yew Trees is a 55+ sheltered accommodation, the latter which is particularly close and unshielded from the depot site. In respect to lighting, I note there is a separately approved planning application that's been approved for the Screwfix sign that is limited to 600 lumens, so I won't touch on that today. As part of the application, there has been HGV delivery times of either 6 AM or 8:30 PM,
which one would assume during most of the year would require further external lighting to safely operate. Condition 5 as part of this application excludes the 6 AM delivery slot. However, external lighting for the 8 to 8:30 PM delivery slot would go against the previous condition on the site to have no external lighting past 7 PM. Condition 3 of the original application for Bishopswaltham Depot came as part of a study by the Bat Conservation Trust. That said, on lighting, I note and welcome condition 5 that has been attached that requires the application to gain further approval from Winchester City Council, especially as not only this would potentially, with the additional lighting affect the Yew Tree residents, but within the Bishopswaltham Conservation Zone and a 5-second walk from the South Downs National Park, and their dark skies policy would prevent light spillage. I do, however, feel as though the Bat Conservation Trust study requiring any external lighting to be shut off after 7 PM should be respected, meaning a condition on delivery and opening times would be considered, which I'll touch on later. On the traffic concerns, I note that unfortunately Hampshire Highways have made their report with no concerns, and the committee will follow their guidance in accepting that report as they are the Highways Authority. In regards to noise, I note the noise impact survey from the developer that has commissioned. I welcome the condition not allowing the 6 AM delivery slot as noted, because of the significant noise impacts from the deliveries. However, would like this to go further to restrict delivery times to that of the depot application that was approved in 2019 and condition delivery times of 8 AM to 7 PM Monday to Friday, 8 AM to 1 PM on Saturday with no Sunday or bank holiday timing, so slightly different to the condition that's been proposed today. I feel this is very important to alter the proposed condition, as otherwise under policy DM20, I fear this would have an adverse impact on the neighbouring residents from both the care home and the sheltered accommodation at Yew Trees. A further comment to the noise impact survey, I would be keen to know why the applicant submitted significantly different customer numbers for the noise survey to that they are expecting in regards to customer numbers. The agent's response to many comments states that there would be an average of 6 customers per hour. The noise impact contractor presented the report with a maximum number of customers at 2.9 per hour, less than half of what Screwfix are expecting for customers, predominantly from the trade industry and likely car or van traffic. Therefore, I'd like to ask the committee if they are minded to approve the application to alter conditions proposed to restrict the delivery times as mentioned, but also restrict the opening hours to match that of the original permitted times for the Bishopswaltham Depot and other units there, especially as this site is within a residential area. Moving from the proposed 7 AM to 8 PM to 8 AM to 7 PM, Monday to Friday, and on Saturdays from the proposed 7 AM to 6 PM to 8 AM to 6 PM, and not to be open on Sundays and bank holidays would seem reasonable to mitigate the noise. These small changes would result in a significantly reduced impact to the immediate local residents, especially in Yew Trees, as well as the Bishopswaltham Conservation Zone. It would still allow late opening times for the proposed new business and increase in opportunities for local employment. These conditioned opening hours I've suggested far exceed other sites in Bishopswaltham, which share the same change of classification and which are also in residential areas, so I feel as though they are appropriate. Thank you again for the time. I look forward to hearing the decision.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. That's thank you. I'm afraid that Councillor Edwards is temporarily having to leave the meeting for a personal reason. So let's move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Have we got any questions of clarification? Councillor Small.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned something, sorry, you talked very quickly. I might have missed it. It might be me. You said something about current opening times and about mirroring those. Are there current opening times already set, and can you just say what they are?
Yes, so as part of the original Bishopswaltham Depot, the opening times proposed on the original application were 8 AM to 7 PM, Monday to Friday, and then 8 AM to 1 PM on Saturday. Currently, the sites, the current occupants of the site, I think they close at 5 PM. Hampshire Isle of Wight, obviously all hours, but they've now left the site and are in their new facility in Bishopswaltham.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. And we now have the supporter. You may return to your seat. Thank you, Councillor Williams. We have Charlotte Mills. Yes, the agent. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just holding on a second, just you can stay there, that's fine. We've got a bit of a technical issue with our screen here at the front. If you could just hold on a sec. Okay, I think we can manage without this screen operating. So thank you very much. If you'd like to carry on, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Charlotte Mills. I am the agent for this planning application and I will be speaking in support of the proposal on behalf of Screwfix Direct Limited. Screwfix Direct is seeking to occupy the application premises which itself is situated on an existing business park in proximity to neighbouring residential properties for Class B8 storage or distribution purposes with an ancillary tray counter. The proposed change of use would allow the premise of
Cameron, did you have anything else to add to what we've heard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to clarify something about the wording of the condition number 3 in terms of operate what it's controlling. So condition 3, what we've done, and it's standard, as you'll see with the 2019 permission, it is very similar to the wording that we've used there, which is centered around deliveries. So what it does is it prevents noisy machinery and deliveries that cannot be undertaken between those times. This site has never had a restriction on the operational hours. There's never been a condition on it that has specifically said businesses that use this property must operate between these hours. We've never limited it. So in this case, taking into account the noise impact assessment and what our colleagues in environmental health have said regarding potential impact of things like vehicles using the site and also deliveries, we've seen it acceptable to use that condition to limit that impact. Noting that because the building is already within Class E, we would already expect, so that basically puts in things like retail and things like that. We'd already expect these units to generate some trip and some noise through trips to access the site, because it as I say, with the use classes and it's fallen into, it can be used like that. So just a bit of clarification on that. Also on lighting, the application doesn't seek to make any alterations to that original condition, so that condition on the 2019 application is still extant. And we've repeated on this one that any external lighting whatsoever related to this unit would require a planning application further down the line where any changes to be requested. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lee.
I wonder if the officer could just clarify for me the issue of noise. I think Councillor Williams mentioned a noise survey with a number of customers per hour, and then I heard another figure. Is the noise survey taken outside the building with activities inside the building, and is it also including what's going on in and around the forecourt? So is it covering everything?
So the noise survey was primarily focused with noise generated by activity outside of the building. So the main focus of that and the concern that was raised that generated the noise impact survey was the impact that deliveries and vehicles moving in and out of the site could have on the neighbouring properties. So that's what that is mainly considering, and that's why the condition deals with deliveries. We've also, through that, in association with the environmental health officer, looked at potential noise impact of people coming on and off the site, but it was agreed that that could be appropriately mitigated partially by staff on site and was considered background noise and therefore acceptable. But the noise impact report that's what it effectively was considering.
Sorry, if I just ask for clarification, you talked about mitigation by the staff. What do you mean?
So informal operation, we would expect people to be respectful of neighbours when coming in and out of the site. But as we say, that was identified as background noise. So we assessed it as there was no sort of formal condition or planning reason that we needed to control that through the application. As I say, we've identified deliveries as something that we need to control, but the sort of informal background noise of people entering and leaving the building and site through vehicles was considered acceptable.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just as Cameron was speaking there, I was looking through the noise assessment, and it does go into detail on further mitigation. It's measures such as ensuring delivery bay doors and shutters are well maintained, switching off radio when delivery doors are open, going into quite common sense things, but it is also secured in the noise assessment as well as a mitigation.
Could I ask, Cameron, if it's not reasonable, given the particular susceptibility, sensitivities of the neighbours, the immediate neighbours on both sides, we have we have housing for older people. That bearing that in mind, is it not reasonable to restrict the noise elements of this operation? I accept that there's never been a time limit on other operations, but the deliveries and any noisy machinery to remain at the finished point of 7 p.m. instead of extending it to 9 p.m. Is that, given the particular circumstances that this building is in, is that not reasonable?
Thank you, Chair. So this was assessed. As I say, the business requirement has been put to us that they would like it to be later. So we have considered that with environmental health, and the compromise was made that it would be acceptable to go to 9 and then have a cut-off point there.
Chair, if you don't mind, these are tricky, these time windows, but our environmental health team have powers to deal with statutory nuisance as well outside of our planning powers. So they have considered that the opening hours of 0800 to 2100 for the machinery and deliveries is reasonable here. There is going to be some other activity on site because we can't limit that because this building already has that permission to use that. But I think our environmental health colleagues, who you will know raise a high bar, are satisfied this is a reasonable approach, but they do have other powers if there does become a statutory nuisance. And I think we can rely on that, Chair. We can rely on other remedies outside of our planning powers to deal with that.
Thank you, Mrs. Pinnock. Okay, and I understand, Cameron, that the lighting is also conditioned in here. We've got a lighting condition, haven't we? Where is it? The lighting condition. There should be a lighting condition.
Chairman, condition 5, prior to the installation of any external lighting, whether freestanding or affixed, requires details to be submitted to and approved in writing by us. And I think if you wouldn't mind, Joe, I'd recommend we add a further line there to say and must thereafter be retained in accordance with the approved details. So that that's the sort of the belt and braces part of the suggested condition, Chair.
Thank you. That's acceptable. Any more questions for our officer? If not, yes, Councillor Lee.
Sorry, could you just expand on that? So the lighting is going to be allowed to go on when, and when does it go off?
Thank you, Chair. So the original application for this site deals with the lighting conditions as we've laid out. So at the moment, there are controls based on the 2019 application, which controlled the external lighting. So you can see the lighting posts there. So it would still have to remain in accordance with this. So as has been outlined, that's the 7 p.m. cutoff. This application doesn't seek to change anything about the external lighting on the site. So it has to be done in accordance with their existing permission, and no changes here. However, further down the line, any exceptions or alterations that would be considered by us through the planning process.
Right, shall we move to debate? No debate? Right, well, this Councillor Ashworth.
Yeah, sorry, last minute. Chair, your suggestion of reducing the hours from 9 o'clock to maybe 7 p.m. I understand what Mrs Pinnock has suggested, but I would like to support that, considering there is an all people's care home nearby.
I think our officer advice is that that wouldn't be reasonable. Yeah, Mrs Pinnock?
Well, I think, Chair, we've consulted with our environmental protection colleagues and they're satisfied that this is an appropriate opening hours that wouldn't cause them harm in terms of statutory nuisance, and they do have those other powers. So in that regard, I don't think we can condition it, we can alter the conditions that the applicant has applied for. And I think you asked the agent that question, they've indicated they wouldn't want that, Chair. So I think you have to make a judgment on this application that's in front of you. I mean, unless our legal advisor with the other views, but that would be my advice to you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we were told that if noise is an issue for local residents, it is something that they can take up with our with other officers, with the noise control officers. So there are other avenues should it be a problem. Otherwise, we've got quite strict time limits here, which I think we would definitely, as part of the planning conditions. So with that in mind, this application is recommended for approval. Can I see all those in favour? That's all members. Thank you very much. So that is approved. We will return at 2:15 to start the next half of this agenda. Thank you very much.